Good morning, good day, or good evening, wherever you are. A wise man once said, "The face is the place," and no color combination embodies that essential truth quite like Boros. But just like shrimp, there's so many different flavors of face. You can punch someone in the face with equipment. You can punch someone in the face with vehicles. You can punch someone in the face with a million tiny dorks, or just one large fella. All jokes aside, you can expect some real gems to build around, and even one of my absolute favorite commanders of this entire series. Before we dive into the video, a small PSA, because the YouTube comment section is not the best place to discuss commanders and deck building in depth, I created a Discord server. You can find the link in the description. If you want help with your decks, want to find like-minded people, or want to suggest an idea that you'd like me to explore, the Discord is the right place. Whether you are having a quick snack before work, or just loafing around playing Slay the Spire 2 with some good old second screen entertainment, or just put this on the TV to slowly fade to sleep on your couch, sit back, relax, and enjoy. We will start with an addendum because Lorehold the Historian is not yet out, but when I saw this commander, I immediately started building a deck around it, so I wanted to share what I found. Lorehold is a 5 mana 5/5 Elder Dragon with flying and haste because he is a Boros dragon from the upcoming Strixhaven set. Apart from that, he has 2 paragraphs. First, we'll start with the lower one. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you may discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. So, it gives you the option to discard and draw a card every turn in a turn cycle. Why does he do this? Well, because each instant and sorcery card in your hand has Miracle 2. Miracle is a mechanic that reads, you may cast a card for its miracle cost when you draw it, if it's the first card you drew this turn. Of course, the way this works is you draw an instant or sorcery, and if it is very pricey and you want to play it, you get to even ignore timing restrictions here, so you could cast sorceries during opponent's turns. You reveal it to everyone, prove that it was the first card you drew that turn, which means you slightly have to alter the way you draw cards, unfortunately. And then instead of paying its actual mana cost, you can pay 2 generic because that's the line of text that Lorehold has. Now, when evaluating cards like Lorehold that obviously aim to cheat stuff into play, the first thing I do is I look at the payoffs. And in red and white, unfortunately, the instants and sorceries are quite different from the really good hits that we know exist in blue, like extra turn spells and drawing a million cards. Especially in red, you can go for a route that I can only recommend if your friends really love you. And that is land destruction, because about 56% of the sorceries in red that cost more than 6 mana are destroy all creatures and destroy all lands and artifacts and whatever. They kind of just destroy everything. In white, on the other hand, all the big instants and sorceries are either gain a lot of life or destroy every creature. One of those, the red instants and sorceries, are something that you can build around, but it's also something that's gonna make you lose friends. I chose to highlight cards that I think can take this deck into a different direction. Because while not overly abundant, quite a few of especially the white instants and sorceries actually return stuff from your graveyard to the battlefield. Mostly artifact and enchantment cards. We see this on Brilliant Restoration and Redress Fate. We see a Boros reanimate for artifacts in Wake the Past, which just returns all artifacts from your graveyard to the battlefield and they gain haste. And something like Profound Journey, a 7 mana return any permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield and it has rebound. I think this can take you into a deck building direction where you cycle a bunch of artifacts that we're going to talk about later. For red, it's mostly about mana advantage. Hit the Motherlode is a 7 mana sorcery. You discover 10, aka you flip cards from your library until you hit something that costs 10 or less. And if the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, you create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to the difference. Also producing treasures is Brass's Bounty, a 7 mana sorcery that reads, for each land you control, create a treasure token. Volcanic Visions can serve as a one-sided board wipe because for 7 mana, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and then this card deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each creature your opponents control. Insurrection is one of those sorceries that got slowly power crept out of Commander, but if you get to play it for 2 mana, it becomes a lot more powerful. 5 and 3 red, untap all creatures and gain control of them until end of turn. They gain haste until end of turn. Two personal favorites of mine are the white card Reverse the Sands, an 8 mana sorcery where you redistribute any number of players' life totals. That means you can choose the highest life total and gain it for yourself. That means even if you're at 5 HP, you simply give those 5 HP to a different player. Rise of the Eldrazi is a 12 mana colorless sorcery. It can't be countered. And the effect is you destroy a permanent, target player draws 4 cards, and then you take an extra turn after this one, exile Rise of the Eldrazi. The basic principle, of course, in a Lorehold deck is you play a bunch of these, you either draw them as your card for turn, or you use Lorehold's third paragraph to draw into them during an opponent's upkeep. But Miracle faces the same issue that it always does. What if you have all of these payoffs in hand instead of on top of your library? And here we need to refer to a different profile of card, and that is effects that put cards on top of your library. Most famously, Sensei's Divining Top and Scroll Rack are both awesome of making sure you have a big payoff on top of your library. There is more cards though that do this. Everybody knows the blue instant Brainstorm, but unfortunately that's not in our color identity. Thankfully, Wizards printed the Brainstone, not to be confused with the Stone Brain. Brainstone is a 1 mana artifact that you can sacrifice for 2 and tapping it to draw 3 cards and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. You can do this in response to the trigger of Lorehold to put one of the payoffs on top and then draw into it during an opponent's turn. Biblioplex, although lower power level, is still quite the playable card here. It's a 4 mana 2/1 gargoyle, and when it enters the battlefield you put up to 1 target instant or sorcerer from your graveyard on top of your library, so instead of your hand, this can recur something from the graveyard and make sure you play it again. Not Forgotten is a 2 mana sorcery that does the same. You put target card from a graveyard on top or bottom of its owner's library, and then you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token. There's 2 more cards that I'm quite excited about that I found them. One is Penance, a 3 mana enchantment. It reads, choose a card from your hand and put that card on top of your library to prevent all damage from a black or red source. You can simply do this and activate this whenever you want to make sure your top card is one of the payoffs that you accidentally drew instead of casting it for 2. And lastly, one of my absolute highlights of the episode, Library of Lang is a 1 mana artifact. It reads, you have no maximum hand size. I know Commander plays left that line of text. And if an effect causes you to discard a card, you discard it, but you may put it on top of your library instead of into your graveyard. Now Lorehold says you may discard a card, and if you do, you draw a card. There is replacement effects that make it so you don't discard cards anymore, but Library of Lang is not one of those. Library of Lang specifically says you still discard the card, but instead of discarding it into your graveyard, you discard it on top of your library. If you have a Library of Lang in the field, you go to someone's upkeep and you discard, let's say, a Brass's Bounty. Instead of putting it in your graveyard, you put it on top, you draw it, and voila. For 2 generic mana, you get to cast that juicy 7 mana sorcery that creates a bunch of treasure tokens. Let's talk about a few more things that affect this deck. A small side note is whenever you discard a card, you can think of Madness as a mechanic. I chose Frantic Purification to include in my hypothetical Lorehold deck. It's a 3 mana instant. It simply destroys a target enchantment, but should you discard it, and again you discard a card with Lorehold, you can cast it for a white instead of letting it go to a graveyard and go to waste. That's quite nice. Galvanoth follows a similar profile as your commander. It is a 5 mana 3/3 beast, and at the beginning of your upkeep you may look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. That's pretty sweet. another thing that can give you a bit more assurance on what to do in regards to Lorehold is Verge Rangers, a 3-mana 3/3 from Duskmourn. It has first strike, and you may look at the top card of your library at any time. As long as an opponent controls more lands than you may play lands from the top of your library. So not only is it natural card advantage, you're red and white, people will pull ahead of you in terms of lands and play, but also it gives you a lot of information on what you can and should do with your Lorehold triggers. As per usual, we'll go through these alphabetically and start with Agrus Ko's Eternal Soldier. He is a 4-mana 3/4 Spirit Soldier. He has Vigilance and a very interesting ability, because whenever it becomes a target of an ability that targets only it, you may pay 1 and a split Boros, and if you do, copy that ability for each other creature you control that ability could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures, of course. We have seen similar effects on cards like Zada, the Hidden Grinder, where you copy something onto each other creature you control. What is very unique about Agrus is that most of the time, this will refer to instants and sorceries that target specific creature, aka Zada, for example, and then copy that spell that was cast on Zada to everyone else. Here, we can copy abilities, and there are some abilities that are just insanely strong. Let's start with a card that is already good, but just becomes a lot better in your Agrus Ko's deck. Mother of Runes is one of the best white 1-drops ever made. It's a 1-mana 1/1 and it taps to give target creature you control protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. This is already pretty good in any deck that can realistically play it, because it can protect itself, it can protect your commander. With Agrus Ko's, of course, you can give protection to your entire board for 2 mana. And let's not forget that, yes, this is good against, your Swords to Plowshares, all those nasty removal spells, but protection is also a way to get around blockers. This is evasion for your entire board. But let's move on to some more specifically good cards. Angelic Sellsword sits in a nice spot where it both supports the go wide plan as well as supporting the ability copying. It's a 5-mana 4/4. It has flying and vigilance. Whenever it attacks, if its power is 6 or greater, you draw a card, and whenever it or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, the ability that you get here, aka +1/+0 for your entire board for 2 mana, of course, isn't like this insane game ender. But what I really like is that this does both. It provides this ability, but it also provides the tokens to copy that ability too. But we can dream bigger. Orthian, Hero of Lavabrink, is a 4-mana 3/3. For 2, 1 and a red, and tapping it, you can create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. If instead of paying 2, you pay 4, you get to create a copy of every creature on your side of the board. Of course, the legendary creatures will get sacrificed immediately, but you will be playing a bunch of non-legendaries as well. Taranika, a Crone veteran, is a 3-mana 3/3 vigilance. Whenever it attacks, untap another target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature has base power and toughness 4/4 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Now, this is of course where Ko's gets a bit more tricky. So far, we've talked about only activated abilities being copyable, but of course, triggered abilities you can also copy. That makes it so when you swing with Taranika, Agrus, and your entire board, you can target Agrus first, pay 2, and then your entire board, except for Taranika, will turn into 4/4 indestructible creatures. This is especially good if you attack with a bunch of 1/1 soldier tokens, for example. But getting to untap your entire board and attacking with indestructible kind of gives you one free attack at the cost of Taranika and nothing else. Another card that has a very good triggered ability is Thundering Raiju, a 4-mana 3/3 haste. And whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And then Thundering Raiju deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. If you have, let's say, 4 or 5 other creatures next to Thundering Raiju and Agrus, you attack, you target Agrus, you copy the ability to every creature, and subsequently get to deal, well, at least 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, kind of like a weird iteration of Storm in a way, damage to your opponents. There's a million more good activated and triggered abilities. I want to talk about one more, but it is a card that will get featured on this list later on as a commander as well. It's Duke Ulder Ravengard, a 6 mana 5/5 human noble soldier. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste and myriad until end of turn. Now haste everybody knows, and everybody immediately understands that giving all your creatures haste is very powerful. But that is an effect that we usually see for 3 mana, I'd say. Myriad, on the other hand, is not something that Wizards is willing to give out freely. That is because it is insanely powerful. If you don't know what Myriad does, whenever the creature that has Myriad attacks, for each opponent other than the person it's already attacking, you get to create a token that's attacking those other players. That means if you swing at player A, you will get token copies attacking player B and C. And you know what that means? That means ETBs, in addition to just having more creatures to swing at your opponents. The tokens, because of safety reasons, exile themselves at end of combat, so you do not get die triggers. And very notable, which some people do make the mistake at first, you also do not get attack triggers. Let's say, for example, Taranika would not trigger because those creatures enter attacking. They never attacked, which is semantics, but this is Magic after all. It's a game all about semantics. So, Duke Ulder Ravengard not only gives haste to your entire board for the mere cost of 2 mana, it also makes it so you can suddenly triple your number of creatures. Aisha of Sparks and Smoke is a 3 mana 4/2 human warrior. She has prowess, and for 1 split Boros mana, it gains first strike until end of turn. Whenever Aisha deals combat damage, you may cast a sorcery spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to that damage without paying its mana cost. Let's clear up some things that might not be super obvious. 3 mana 4/2 prowess, easy peasy. You can give it first strike, also very easily understandable. The first thing where you need to pay attention here is that you cannot cast instant or sorcery spells from your hand. It's just sorcery spells from your hand with mana value less than or equal to that damage without paying its mana cost. It is not instance that you get to cheat into play. The other thing that can trip people up is Aisha does not care about combat damage to players. If she gets blocked, you still get those sorceries. Just because you can cheat sorceries into play does not mean that you should refrain from putting instants in your deck. She does have prowess after all, so some combat tricks like Dreadmaw's Ire is perfectly fine. Might of the Meek also replaces itself, triggers prowess, makes it so you can deal more damage, because I believe the magical number for Aisha to hit is 5, and we'll see why in a short second. One of the best instants that you could be casting for sure is stuff like Temur Battle Rage, which for 2 mana gives a creature double strike. If you do control a creature with power 4 or greater, which Aisha is naturally, you also get trample, which is quite nice. But the very important part here is that double strike makes it so you can cheat 2 sorceries from your hand into play. Now, what sorceries are we cheating into play? Whenever I see abilities that are natural mana cheating, I think you need a card advantage to back it up. White Red isn't the best ability when it comes to card advantage, especially since all the impulse draw that Red gets doesn't really work for Aisha because you can only cheat stuff from your hand into play. But stuff like Secret Rendezvous, a 3 mana sorcery which makes you and target opponent draw 3 cards, is about the best you can get in mono white in Commander. On the other hand, stuff like Wheel of Fate is really interesting because since Aisha allows you to cast a card without paying its mana cost, that means a card like Wheel of Fate which usually doesn't have a mana cost and thus is impossible to cast, is still castable for the Aisha player, and it being a wheel provides you with a lot of card advantage in an aggressive deck. Later on in the game, you just discard your hand and draw 7 cards, and that goes for every player at the table. If we dream bigger, I think you should definitely include cards that give you extra combat steps, because extra combat steps also means extra sorceries that you get to cheat into play. Classic example, Relentless Assault, 4 mana sorcery, untap all creatures that attack this turn. After this phase, additional combat phase, followed by additional main phase. Waves of Aggression, 5 mana, untap all creatures that attack this turn. Get an additional combat. This one has retrace, so you can cast it again and again and again by discarding land cards, in addition to the cost of the sorcery. Full Throttle is a pretty new one, 6 mana. After this main phase, there are an additional 2 combat phases, and of course at the beginning of each combat this turn, untap all creatures that attack this turn. I said 5 is probably the magical number for Aisha, but consider this: you hit with Aisha once, she deals 4 damage, you get to play Relentless Assault for free. It's a sorcery, so it triggers prowess, and the next time you attack you get to play Waves of Aggression. It's a sorcery, it triggers prowess. Aisha goes up to 6 power, you play Full Throttle, and you work your way up. And then if you are willing to take some risks, I think Last Chance and Warrior's Oath are interesting inclusions. Both of them are functionally the same card. 2 mana sorceries that give you an extra turn, but at the beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. Of course, this is just a last resort for most decks. You could be pairing this up with ways to make you not able to lose the game, but in a pinch, these can just give you an extra combat and who knows how many sorceries you cast. If you don't want to go a full combo route, there's lots of value stuff that you can cheat into play also. Hitting someone for 6 and casting a Farewell for free, choosing everything but creatures maybe, that is pretty good. And looking at the biggest, the baddest sorceries that I could find, I wanted to showcase Rise of the Eldrazi, a 12 mana sorcery, which, I mean, it will be quite hard to cheat into play, but this is red we're talking about, shouldn't be impossible. It's a sorcery, this spell can't be countered, destroy target permanent, target player draws 4 cards, take an extra turn after this one. I think this is the ultimate top end of sorceries that you would like to be cheating into play. It refills your hand, it gets rid of a problematic permanent, and then you get an extra turn to make use of those 4 cards. Safety Valve, it does exile itself, but who cares? Next is a modern staple in Ajani Nacatl Pariah. It's a 2 mana 1/2, but it does come with a friend in the form of a 2/1 white cat warrior creature token. Whenever one or more other cats you control die, you may exile Ajani and then return him to the battlefield, transformed under his owner's control. On the backside, Ajani turns into Ajani Nacatl Avenger. It's a planeswalker with 3 loyalty ability, a +2 that puts a +1/+1 counter on each cat you control, a 0 ability that creates a 2/1 white cat warrior creature token, and when you do, if you control a red permanent other than Ajani, he deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to any target. Very notable, any target. You could dome players for however many cat creatures you have. And lastly, for -4, so quite cheap, each opponent chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest, which is a very powerful effect. It's a bit like, I believe, Cataclysm. At first glance, you have a cat tribal commander. And cat tribal is a thing that Wizards has been slowly but surely working on to make sure the cat and dog lovers of this game can show their love for these creatures. Alm's Collector is a very good cat just in general, 4 mana 3/4 flash. If an opponent would draw 2 or more cards, instead you and that player each draw a card, making it so mass draws become very useless and you benefit off of other people putting some effort into their hand sculpting. Yes, you'll be playing Arabo the First Fang, a 3 mana lord, 2/2, other cats get +1/+1. Whenever it or another non-token cat you control enter, you create a 1/1 white cat creature token. Brim's King of Oreskos is also quite nice, 3 mana 3/4, vigilance. When it attacks, you create a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance that's attacking. Whenever it blocks, create a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance that's blocking the same creature Brimis is blocking. This go white cat token strategy is what at the face is all that cats are about. Yes, I'm playing a bunch of elves. I want as many elves as I can get. Yes, I'm playing a bunch of goblins. I'm playing every goblin that I can find. I'm playing a bunch of cats. I want cat lords and cat creature tokens. But Ajani really showcases that every typal, every tribal strategy should have a sub-theme when you build the deck in mind. In Ajani's case, that is sacrifice. And this is where red comes into play. We've only talked about white cards so far. Let's talk about some sacrifice outlets. You could play one-shot cards like collateral damage, which for 1 mana is a lightning bolt, but you have to sacrifice a creature in addition to its normal casting cost. Infernal Plunge is a wonderful way to generate some mana. For 1, you get 3 red, but as additional cost you need to sacrifice a creature. There is also the repeatable sacrifice outlets. In Barrage of Expendables, a 1 mana red enchantment, where for 1 red and sacrificing a creature you get to deal 1 to target creature or player. And maybe the more flexible and thus better card, Goblin Bombardment, where you invest 2 up front, but then the sacrifice is free. Just sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to any target. Most of these cards at instant speed can flip Ajani, so you could even wait until your opponents attack you. You could block with Ajani, sacrifice a cat, and suddenly you have a planeswalker instead of a creature that doesn't die. In a perfect space in between the cat and the sacrifice cards is Felidar Cub, the last card I want to mention. 2 mana 2/2, sacrifice it to destroy target enchantment. Wonderfully flexible. There will be enchantments in your game, most likely. It's a 2 mana 2/2 cat, so if you care only about having cats, it also contributes to that. But of course, sacrificing itself is the easiest way to flip Ajani. I believe from the Edges of Eternity commander set comes Alibou, Ancient Witness, a 5 mana 4/5 golem. Other artifact creatures you control have haste. Whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control attack, Alibou deals X damage to any target, and you scry X, where X is the number of tapped artifacts you control. Let's dissect this card. The first paragraph of text cares about artifact creatures specifically. The second line of text cares about you having creatures that attack, but also it cares about just any tapped artifacts you control. Those do not specifically need to be artifact creatures. If we're thinking artifact creatures that would like to have haste, we can think of stuff like Mirror Battlesphere, 7 mana 4/7. When it enters, create 4 1/1 colorless Mirror artifact creature tokens. When it attacks, you can tap any number of Mirror to give Mirror Battlesphere +X/+0, and then have it deal X damage to target player or planeswalker it's attacking. Here you invest 7 mana in a creature that yes comes with 4 1/1s, but it would very much like to immediately attack and deal a bunch of damage. Mirror Battlesphere is also so nice because it comes with 4 tokens that you can immediately tap. So the way that this would work is you have Alibou out, you play your Mirror Battlesphere, it gains haste, you decide to attack and tap all the mirrors. Thus you have 5 tapped artifacts for sure. Mirror Battlesphere plus the 4 mirrors. And that means Mirror Battlesphere gets to dome something for 4. And then Alibou deals 5 damage to any target and you scry 5 because you have 5 tapped artifacts. The next step would be to create a bunch of artifacts. Yes, of course, we want as many artifacts that we can tap. So we're thinking Stride Hanger Automaton, 3 mana 1/4. If 1 or more artifact tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying are created instead. And of course, you can use that Thopter to then attack and trigger Alibou. Retrofitter Foundry is a wonderful card. For 1 mana, you get a bunch of effects. First, for 3 mana, you can untap it. That's nice. For 2 and tap, you create a 1/1. For 1 and tap, you can sacrifice a servo to create a 1/1 colorless flying creature. And for tapping and just sacrificing that flying creature, you can get a 4/4 colorless artifact creature token. So usually the way this works is you work your way up from a 1/1 servo to a Thopter to then a construct. But since we care about going wide, not tall, it might be the case that we just activate the first ability over and over again. But we don't just need to think creature tokens. Monologue Tax is honestly relatively affordable. It's around $5, I believe, where I live. 3 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. This should provide like 4 to 5 treasure tokens at least in most games where you drop it early. Academy Manufacture is a great way to triple up on the tokens you create. Whenever you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, create one of each instead. And let's not forget that you're gonna be playing a bunch of artifacts anyways. Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, those cards are in your deck quite naturally. So you'll have a bunch of things that you can tap. Let's talk about things that make it easy for you to tap your artifacts. Whenever you read tapped creatures, think crew or saddle. I chose Aerial Surveyor as an example. 3 mana 3/4 flying. When it attacks, if defending player controls more lands than you, search your library for a basic plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. It is a vehicle, so you need to crew 2, aka put at least 2 power into this creature in the form of tapping them. And it's perfect because yes, it wants to haste, and yes, it can tap all of your creatures to deal the highest amount of X damage possible, and then scry X also. Another card that saw some play in competitive formats was Girapur Ether Grid, a 3 mana enchantment that makes it so you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, no matter if it's tokens or creatures or non-creatures, to have it deal 1 damage to any target. Of course, this is here so you can tap all of those automatons, all those thoptas and constructs and clues and treasures that are otherwise just useless on your board to not only deal damage but also buff your Alibou. If you have the money and the right power level at your table, you could be playing cards like Metal Worker that just love the haste on Alibou. 3 mana 1/2 tap, reveal any number of artifact cards in your hand, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool for each card revealed this way. Usually, commanders either go tall or go wide route, aka put a bunch of counters on me or create a bunch of tokens alongside me. Anim Pakal says, why not both? For 3 mana, you get a 1/2 human soldier. And whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal, then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. Don't worry too much about trying to find non-gnome creatures. Every creature in Magic, except for a very select few, is a non-gnome creature. So you can just be playing the best, the baddest cards that you could think of. I see good synergy with cards like Luminarch Aspirant, 2 mana 1/1 at the beginning of combat on your turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This could be buffing up Anim Pakal, so a play pattern could be: turn 2 you play Luminarch Aspirant, turn 3 you play Anim Pakal. Luminarch Aspirant puts its +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal, and then it attacks to trigger Anim Pakal's ability, because yes, you need to attack with 1 or more creatures that are not gnomes, but it does not need to be Anim Pakal herself. That means turn 2, you can trigger her and create at least 1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. Gold Knight Commander, I also see some good synergy here. 4 mana 2/2, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So if you play Anim Pakal turn 3, Gold Knight Commander the next turn, it will buff Anim Pakal. Let's say it's a 2/3 because we haven't done anything else. Anim Pakal goes to attack and will consequently create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that will each trigger Gold Knight Commander and become 3/3s immediately, and Anim Pakal becomes pretty hard to kill because it will have a 4/5 stat line turn 4. To buff up the power of Anim Pakal, I could see cards like Blade of the Blood Chief, 1 mana, equipment, 1 to equip. Whenever a creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on equipped creature. If equipped creature were a vampire, you'd put 2 counters on it instead, but I think it's good enough to just have the blade sitting around, because you'll be creating a bunch of 1/1s that are tapped and attacking, and then it becomes really difficult for the player who's blocking to justify it to the table that they are making your Anim Pakal bigger. Similarly, Tarian's Soul Cleaver is a 1 mana equipment. It has equip 2, but it does give the equipped creature vigilance. Whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, does not to be your creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. These are just one way to get your Anim Pakal huge. You could of course also be playing instants and sorceries that buff its power. Really, the world is your oyster here. I wanted to talk about 2 more cards. One of them is Noble Heritage, a 2 mana background. That means it's an enchantment that you could be playing in the command zone, but we're not doing that here. Commander creatures you own have, when this creature enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. For each opponent who does, you gain protection from that player until your next turn. This is very nice because you are one of the players that gets to put 2+1/+1 counters on your Anim Pakal, and then you get to swing at said player as long as Anim Pakal is big enough to survive, or you have another creature to trigger her, and they cannot retaliate because you'll have protection from them if they chose to put +1/+1 counters on their creatures. Very nice. Lastly, we've talked about a bunch of white cards. The thing that red does when it comes to go wide is either give board wide buffs, which you'll find numerous of, and also stuff like Impact Tremors is perfect with Anim Pakal. 2 mana, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. And I believe everyone can see what the thought behind including a card like this in your Anim Pakal deck is. We have a few equipment and vehicle commanders in here, and I'll try my best to highlight the difference between each of them. Astor, Bearer of Blades, is a 4 mana 4/4 human warrior. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal an equipment or vehicle card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Additionally, equipments you control have equip 1, and vehicles you control have crew 1. First glance, it's very nice that this card replaces itself. This is quite the high priority target to remove for your opponents, but it will at least have provided you some value the moment it enters the battlefield on your side. And then the abilities are very obvious. If we have something that cheats on equip cost, we are looking to find cards that have high equip cost. Colossus Hammer is maybe the most prominent example because it costs 1 mana and gives a creature +10/+10, but it does cost equip 8. If we get to cut that cost out of the equation, then suddenly we have an absurd equipment, of course. If we're thinking bigger and better, Cauldron Complete does cost 7 mana, and it does come with a token, so it's not quite as reliant on Astor, but it does have Indestructible, and the equipped creature gets +5/+5, First Strike, Trample, Indestructible, Haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, exile that creature. It has equip 7, so should the opponent somehow get rid of the token that Cauldron Complete is equipped to, when it comes into the battlefield, then you're quite glad to have it equip 1 in addition to its equip 7. But I would argue that this card specifically is more of a vehicle commander than it is an equipment commander, because there are better equipment commanders that you could be playing. For vehicles, less so. What are the vehicles that we're looking to cheat on its crew cost? The Colossus Hammer of vehicles is Consulate Dreadnought. 1 mana, 7/11 stat line, but it has crew 6. 1 mana, 7/11 is pretty good, even though in Commander it's not good enough to win the game on its own. If you can start off the game with a 7/11, you're happy. At the 2 mana slot, we have Colossal Plow, a 6/3, and whenever it attacks, you add 3 white mana and gain 3 life. Until end of turn, you don't lose that mana as steps in phase's end. It also has crew 6, and is perhaps one of the best things you could be crewing turn 3. And of course, if we're thinking big vehicles, Parhelion II, 8 mana 5/5, flying, First Strike, Vigilance. When it attacks, you create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. It has crew 4, so it's not out of the world. Even your commander itself could crew this. But if we're thinking of going maybe wide with a bunch of pilot tokens or soldier tokens, then the crew 1 does play a nice role. The next creature on this list, I have to admit I don't have a good build for. I mainly wanted to include it because I love the artwork. It's Basandra Battle Seraph, a 5 mana 4/4 flying that reads players can't cast spells during combat, and for 1 red mana, target creature attacks this turn if able. If we go through this card, yes, there's not a lot of text, but there still is some nuance. Players can't cast spells during combat means instant speed combat tricks and protection spells are kind of out. But what players can still do is activate abilities during combat. That means cards like Kami of the False Hope, a 1 mana 1/1 that you can sacrifice to prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, are still viable inclusions. If you want to go a Pillow Fort route, which I would probably recommend, Bridget is a 4 mana 2/3 First strike, it taps to deal 2 damage to each attacking or blocking creature target player controls. Avenger and Dahl is a very old card. For 2 mana, it's a 1/1, and for 3 in tapping and discarding a card from your hand, you get to exile target attacking creature from the game. Its control against life equal to its toughness, so kind of like a Swords to Plowshares on a stick. And if we move on to the second paragraph of Basandra, for 1 red, you make it so target creature attacks this turn if able. This, of course, is very reminiscent of the goad mechanic, which is very prominent in red, especially in Commander, but it has a very significant and notable downside, because goad makes it so those creatures cannot attack you. There's 3 ways to make someone attack someone else instead of you. You could be playing a bunch of goad cards, actual goad cards, alongside Basandra. Disrupt Decorum, 4 mana, goad all creatures you don't control. Very easy, you'll be safe for this round of combat. You could be incentivizing them to attack someone else by playing cards like Curse of Opulence. 1 mana, whenever the enchanted or cursed player is attacked, you create a gold token and every opponent that is attacking that player does the same. Or you could be dissuading them from attacking you. Orification is a 4 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature deals damage to you, put a gold counter on it. Each creature with a gold counter on it is a wall in addition to its other creature types, which is old wording for it gets Defender. Those tokens are removed when Orification leaves the play. And really, this is how I imagine a Basandra Battle Seraph deck to go. You play a bunch of Pillow Fort cards like Calm Your False Hope, Orifications. You make it so other people are more attractive to attack by playing cards like Curse of Opulence, and you play some gold cards in the mix, all the while you try and find some way to win the game, which in white and red probably is going to be some form of combat damage, but it could also be a different win condition. Following in the footsteps of her crazy uncle, Bre of Clan Stoutarm makes things fly. She's much more gentle though. For 4 mana, you get a 4/4 giant warrior. For 2 in tapping her, another target creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the spell's mana value is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained this turn. If it's more expensive than the amount of life you gained, you get to put it into your hand. Here we kind of have 2 paragraphs. Obviously, the lower one is pretty straightforward and you don't need to worry about it too much in deck building. It is a white commander that cares about you gaining life. Guide of Souls, Soul's Attendant, Soul Warden, all of these cards will ensure you gain a bunch of life. Then, at the beginning of your end step, you will at least draw 1 card, or if you gain more life than the card costs, you actually get to play it for free. That is the very typical way to gain life in white. Play these soul siblings and pair them with a bunch of creatures. When you play a bunch of soul siblings, of course you're gonna play the Ajani's Pride Mates of this world, and maybe even auras like Light of Promise. 3 mana, whenever you gain life, the enchanted creature gets that many +1/+1 counters. But there is another aspect to this commander. As an activated ability, you get to give a creature you control flying and lifelink. Now, Ajani's Pridemate in particular is not only good with soul siblings, but also exceptional in this case. It's a 2 mana 2/2 whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And usually this guy has the problem that he's just a big, dumb 2 mana, whatever, 8/8, 9/9, 10/10. But in Commander, that just isn't good enough. It dies to every removal spell. We're not going to fix that problem. But it also doesn't really do anything. It doesn't have evasion. It doesn't progress your board state. It's just going to get blocked by one of those pesky 1/1 tokens that everybody seems to have. Here, in the form of Bre, we can fix him. No, seriously guys, we can fix him. Because once your 2 mana 10/10 also gains flying and lifelink, suddenly it's an insane threat. This ability to turn big dumb beaters into actual threats because they get evasion is what makes Bre so good in my opinion. If we're looking at Malignus, sounds like the setup for a joke I'm not gonna make. It's a 5 mana star, and its power and toughness are each equal to half the highest life total among your opponents, rounded up. Damage that would be dealt by Malignus can't be prevented. That means, on average, this is going to be like an 18, 18, 19, 19 for 5, which is okay, but an 18, 18 flying lifelink suddenly becomes a lot more threatening. What's also interesting is that Bre gives out keywords, and white, as a color, has the ability to share keywords. There's a couple of cards, maybe most well known is Odric the Lunarch Marshal. For 4 mana you get a 3/3, and at the beginning of each combat, not just your own, creatures you control gain first strike, and flying, and death touch, blah blah blah. They share all of these keywords, right? So main phase 1, you activate Bre, you give a creature flying and lifelink, and then Odric makes it so all of your creatures get flying and lifelink. This ability to share keywords doesn't just come in the form of stuff like Odric Lunarch Marshal, but we've already talked about a way to share them in the very first commander we talked about in this list, Agrus Kos. You target Agrus with Bre of Clan Stoutarm, pay 2 extra, your entire board gets flying and lifelink until end of turn. And then, well, the lower paragraph of Bre is just gonna do its thing. Don't worry about it too much as long as you have ways to gain life passively, and even if you don't, you're gonna give something lifelink. Bre is gonna do a lot of heavy lifting, and it's genuinely one of the more exciting commanders from Low and Eclipsed. Now that was a nice side of the Stoutarm clan, but unfortunately there's also Brion. And Brion, man, we gotta talk about Brion. Brion is also a 4 mana 4/4 giant. It has lifelink, and for red and tapping and sacrificing a creature, it deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player. Now, to me, this is kind of like the face hunter of Magic. He just flings shit in your face. There is a couple of ways to approach this commander. First, we can note that it cares about high-powered creatures. So you could be playing stuff like Malignus in your Brion Stoutarm deck, because flinging 18, 18, 19, 19, 20, 20 into someone's face is still pretty powerful with Brion. The next step would be to look at all the creatures that have very high attack, but that is because they come with a downside. Phyrexian Soulgorger, for example, is a 3 mana 8/8 that makes you sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your upkeep. Well, if it's not around during your next upkeep because you flung it at someone's face, there you go. Red has a tradition of high power creatures, just like Ball Lightning, 3 mana 6/1 trample, haste at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this creature. Use it to attack someone for 6, pay an extra red, and for 4 red mana you dealt 12 damage. Not too bad. The next key to unlocking Brion's full potential, I think, is doubling the damage output. This can be achieved in different ways. For one, you could use stuff like Bulk Up to double target creature's power until end of turn. For 2 mana, doubling the damage, let's take Ball Lightning as an example, making it go to 12, and then flinging it for 12. That sounds pretty enticing to me. Malignus, of course, is a very good example because it has half the highest life total, but rounded up. If you bulk up and then double its power, that means you can one-shot someone. The other way to double damage is of course not by doubling a creature's power, but instead by, well, doubling the damage that you deal. There is a lot of ways in red to do this, mostly enchantment based. I did want to point out a perfect card for Brion in particular though, and Calamity Bearer. Calamity Bearer is a 4 mana 3/4 giant berserker, and if a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Of course, since Brion does the flinging and he does the damage, that means Calamity Bearer works wonders here. As per usual, when you have a commander that kind of does a thing, I would encourage you to play cards that do the same thing if they exist. In Brion's case, he quite literally flings stuff, right? That's what he does. You sacrifice a creature, deal damage to the power. So I would encourage you to also play stuff like Fling. Your commander is not going to be around all of the time, and especially once people figure out what you're trying to do, they will try to counteract it. And if Brion is the only creature or card in your deck that can do it, very quickly you'll find yourself with an 8 mana or 10 mana commander and unable to fling stuff. So Fling, I would include, and similar cards of a similar profile. There is 3 more cards that I want to talk about. First, let's talk about some value. You are going to be sacrificing a lot of creatures. Wouldn't it be nice if you could still use those creatures? Well, you can if you play stuff like Luminous Broodmoth, a 4 mana 3/4, flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. This means you could be sacking your Malignus, deal 18 to someone, and then you would get a Malignus, but it has flying, which is just an upgrade. Isn't that nice? Next, I want to talk about a card that I think should be played in more red decks just in general. It is Chainsaw, a 2-mana equipment. When it enters, it deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature. Whenever 1 or more creatures die, put a counter on Chainsaw. The equipped creature gets +X+0, where X is the number of rev counters on Chainsaw. It has equip 3, and really it's here because you yourself will be accruing quite a few counters on this equipment. But of course, it's a game of Commander. A lot of creatures are going to die. If you get this out early, it is quite easy to see a world where this gets equipped for 3 and gives a creature +10/+0 if uncontested. And then suddenly, every single creature in your deck is worth it to be flung. Lastly, I want to talk about a subset of cards and a strategy to be explored that is blocking. I know we're playing Boros, red and white. We're here to attack, attack, attack. But sometimes you can block and it actually is kind of good. I'm not gonna lie, guys. Where am I going with this? Well, there is a card that gives an absurd stat bonus for just 1 mana, and that is Righteousness. Righteousness is an instant that for 1 white gives target blocking creature +7/+7 until end of turn. If we are looking to kind of combo kill our opponent with stuff like bulk up and then fling, I think Righteousness fits in your deck. It's gonna be a pretty bad surprise for your opponents when they swing at you. You block with your, I don't know, even if it's just a wall of omens. You give it +7/+7, and then you double its strength, and then you fling it into your opponent's face for 14 damage. And this is just like a 0 power creature that we're talking about here. I think the potential that a pump spell that deals 7 damage, quote unquote, to your opponent is quite high. The biggest pump spell that I could find is Glyph of Destruction. It can only target a blocking wall you control, but that wall gets +10/+0, which is insane for 1 mana. And then prevent all damage that would be dealt to it this turn, destroy it at the beginning of the next end step. I think you really can't go better when it comes to rate of power to mana cost than Glyph of Destruction. The last commander that starts with B is Bruenor Battlehammer, a 4 mana 5/3. Each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it. You may pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate each turn. Here we have a subtle difference that heavily impacts the choices that you make in deck. And that is that you kind of want to go wide with your equipments. Usually what you're doing is, yes, you're playing Colossus Hammer. Of course, you're also playing it in your Bruenor Battlehammer deck. It's a 1 mana +10/+10. We just talked about how for 1 mana getting 10 points of stats is insane. Getting 20 points of stats is even more insane. Yes, that card is going to end up in your deck. Probably also Cadric Complete. 7 mana, equip 7, but if you get to equip for free, that's pretty sick. But very importantly, you want as many equipments as humanly possible. And that is where we unlock a completely new subset of cards. If we want to think small, Bloodforge Battle Axe is a 1 mana equipment. It equips for 2, it gives a creature +2/+0, but whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to create a token that's a copy of Bloodforged Battle Axe. Now that is quite nice already, but we can do better. There's a couple of cards that create equipments, or rather turn stuff into equipments. First, let's talk about Toggo Goblin Weaponsmith. Toggo is a 3 mana 2/2, and it has landfall, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a colorless equipment that is called Rock that you can equip for 1, and then you can throw the rocks at stuff to deal 2 damage. There's also Gemcutter Buccaneer, a 4 mana 1/3. Whenever it or another pirate enters, create a tapped treasure tokens, and treasures you control are equipments in addition to their other types, and have equip 3 or equip 1 to pirates, and the effect is target creature, like the equipped creature gets +2/+0. There's also Arterial Alchemy, 3 mana enchantment. When it enters, create a blood token for each opponent you have, and blood tokens become equipments in addition to the other types and have equipped creature gets +2/+0 and equip 2. Now, all of these equipments are pretty shitty. They just give +2/+0, or you can throw them by tapping your creature and dealing 2. But having all of these equipments means you also need a million mana to equip them. There's one card that completely cheats on that, and that is, of course, the card we're all thinking of, Volshock Battlemaster. What? Not Pure Steel Paladin? Nope, Volshock Battlemaster. Everybody knows the Paladin. Let's talk about a different card here. 5 mana 2/2 Human Warrior. It has haste, and whenever it comes into play, attach all equipment in play to it. I could see a nice curve where you play like Arterial Alchemy, create 3 blood tokens. Next turn you play Bruenor. Maybe on turn 1 you even played a Commander's Plate or a Colossus Hammer. And then turn 5 you play a hasty Volshock Battlemaster that just beats people up. Even later in the game, this card will retain its value. Note that this can even steal opposing equipment. I know equipment isn't the most popular card subtype, but it will happen. Especially those boots with the fur, or yeah, actually that's mostly it. Everybody plays boots, and other equipments are quite rare. There is one card though, and we've talked about a bunch of cards that create equipments. There is one card that does it better than every other card, and that is Bludgeon Brawl. Now, Bludgeon Brawl is a 3 mana enchantment like Arterial Alchemy, but it reads each non-creature, non-equipment artifact is an equipment with Equip X. And equipped creature gets +X+0, where X is that artifact's converted mana cost. Why I think this card is so good is it is not that difficult to create artifact tokens, be that food or lander or treasure or whatever you can think of. And with this card, it's possible to turn all of them into equipments that equip for 0, and of course also give +0/+0, but Bruenor, of course, makes it so they give +2/+0, because that's his static ability, right? And thus, I think, is one of the best ways to go wide on equipments. Cadric's Soul Kindler is a 4 mana 4/3 dwarf wizard. Its first line of text is enough to spawn a bunch of decks around it, because it reads, the legend rule doesn't apply to tokens you control. Now already that is enough to start deck building, but of course it is a newer commander, so it kind of enables itself. Because whenever another non-token legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, create a token that's a copy of it. That token gains haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Let's get the obvious out of the way. You read I need to sacrifice a token, you play Sundial of the Infinite to end your turn and get to keep that token. Do it. Do it! Alright, let's talk about some cards that are worth copying. In my opinion, stuff like Adeline is pretty powerful to copy. You could also be copying a commander that's going to show up later on this list in Najali, Sun's Vanguard, which is a human rebel for 4 mana that gives attacking tokens you control double strike. And whenever a token you control attacks a player, you exile the top card of your library. During any turn you attack with a token, you may play that card. It's quite obvious to see why this is powerful. There's of course different ways to create tokens. There is Blade of Selves, a 2 mana equipment that equips for 4 and gives the equipped creature Myriad, meaning whenever it attacks, you create a token copy that attacks each other opponent, so each opponent you didn't attack with the OG copy. Helm of the Host, well known for going infinite. It also creates tokens of an equipped creature. Here, and why this card is so popular, is the tokens aren't legendary, which you technically don't need. The reason why I still point it out is, imagine you accrue a bunch of tokens of legendary creatures, and then somebody kills your Cadric. Well, you would need to sacrifice everything but one of the copies, and that would really suck. So again, here I want to advocate to play cards that do similar things to your commander, unless you're absolutely certain that your commander will never ever go away, which you can't. Let's talk about 3 more cards. Whenever you see tokens, think of the populate mechanic. Now, populate is not that common, but if we look at the base version of the effect, it is 1 mana, Wake the Reflections, sorcery, speed, populate. Populate means create a token that's a copy of a creature token you control. If we're taking the effect to an extreme, on a card like Song of the World's Soul, a 6 mana enchantment, here you get to populate whenever you cast a spell. Determined Iteration is a pretty powerful effect. Unfortunately, that also is reflected in its price. It's a 2 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of combat on your turn you populate. Token created this way gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Here, similar to Helm of the Host, we have an effect that kind of does the same as your commander, which is always welcome. Lastly, a card that I know from my time spent on Magic Arena is Mirror March, a 6-mana enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, flip a coin until you lose a flip. For each flip you won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste, exile them at the beginning of the next end step. And then really the last step in building a Cadric deck, in my opinion, is just finding the legendaries that you want to copy. There's probably a million good ones that have good attack triggers or good ETBs. And then the only thing to do is play Sundial of the Infinite. We already talked about him in the very first section of the video. These cards just go hand in hand. Duke Ulder Ravengard is a 6-mana 5/5. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste and myriad until end of turn. Now, we talked about him in the Agrus section of the video, and that makes sense that Agrus, of course, should be included in your Duke Ulder Ravengard deck because he copies the ability, aka the haste and myriad, to all of your creatures. Yes, you create tokens that go away, you play Sundial of the Infinite. Now, when building around a card like Duke Ulder Ravengard, it is important to note that you can benefit off of good ETBs and you can benefit off of good damage to player effects, but Myriad doesn't actually synergize with good attack triggers because the tokens you create, they enter attack king and never attacked, which is semantics, that's magic for you. That means even though Sigarda's Vanguard might still be good enough with her ETB, her attack trigger is not something you can count on. It's a 5-mana 3/3 flash flying. When it enters or attacks, choose any number of creatures with different powers. Those creatures gain double strike until end of turn. So again, the ETB you get, the attack trigger you don't. Similarly for Sun Titan, my pet card, 6-mana 6/6. When it enters or attacks, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So what are the perfect cards? There's a couple here. The easiest one is stuff like Moonshaker Cavalry, which is the white version of Craterhoof Behemoth, 8 mana 6/6 flying. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain flying and +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures you control. Even if you just drop a Moonshaker Cavalry on a board that has just Duke Ulder, you play the Moonshaker, put a trigger on the stack that gives everything +2/+2, then you give it haste and myriad, you attack, you get 3 more Moonshaker Cavalries, giving everything +5/+5 for every copy you put into play, and then obviously the game is just over. Another card that has a really good ETB is Avenger of Heliod, 6 mana 1/3. When it enters, you gain as many white soldiers as you have white mana pips on the battlefield, aka equal to your devotion to white. And one other card is Wingmate Rock, a 5 mana 3/4 flying. Now, when it enters the battlefield, if you attacked with a creature this turn, create a 3/4 white bird creature token with flying, and whenever it attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking creature. Of course, this second paragraph doesn't trigger, but Raid, on the other hand, will trigger. Of course, the way it works is you play your Duke Ulder Ravengard, you give your Wingmate Rock Myriad, it attacks. And from that moment on, you will have attacked with a creature, meaning all the extra copies of Wingmate Rock that enter the battlefield will have their raid ability online, and you'll get a bunch of 3/4 white bird creature tokens to stick around even after the attack. The second to last card I want to talk about is Archangel of Tithes, a 4 mana 3/5 flying. As long as Archangel of Tithes is untapped, creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. As long as it is attacking, creatures can't block unless the controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. Here we have an effect that makes it pretty much impossible for an opponent to block your entire attack. If you attack with an Archangel of Tithes and get 2 more copies, then for every creature that is supposed to block, your opponents would need to pay 3 mana. The last card I want to talk about is, yes, I've talked about Sundial of the Infinite a bunch, and it does a perfect job here again, as it always does. It's my baby. But there's a card that does something quite similar. Now, when reading Myriad, it is important to note that the tokens get exiled at end of combat, not at end of turn. That means Sundial of the Infinite, you would have to activate end of combat, thus skipping your second main phase, which isn't a big deal. You want to tap out first main phase anyways to play a good creature to give haste and myriad to. But if that is the case, if the trigger goes onto the stack at end of combat, there's another card that can end a turn, and that is Mandate of Peace, usually used to mess with your opponents. Thousandth. It's a 2-mana instant, can only be cast during combat, and your opponents can't cast spells this turn. Lastly, end the combat phase, and in bracket it explains remove all attackers and blockers from combat, exile all spells and abilities from the stack, including the spell. That means, of course, you go to end of combat, the trigger to exile the tokens that were created with Myriad go onto the stack, you play Mandate of Peace, and then for 2 mana you get to keep, well, 2 copies of Sun Titan, Wingmate, or Archangel of Ties, whatever floats your boat. Ertha Joe, Frontier Mentor, is a 4-mana 2/4 core advisor. When it enters, it comes with a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. More importantly though, whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. My first instinct was to say, oh, this is quite similar to Agrus Coast, but much worse. There is an important distinction though, and that is that this guy can also copy abilities that target players. We'll circle back to that, but first let's talk about some obvious synergies. Humble Defector is a almost playable card in pretty much any red deck. For 2 mana, you get a 2/1 that you can tap to draw 2 cards, and then target opponent gains control of Humble Defector. Activate only during your turn. You can kind of trade it back and forth if you manage to form an alliance with someone. Worst case, it's a 2 mana 2/1 that draws you 2 cards, and then you don't care too much about what your opponents do with it. Next, of course, is, we've talked about him a lot, but he's just a great enabler. It's Orthian Hero of Lava Brink, 4 mana 3/3. 2 and tap to create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of next end step, activate only as a sorcery, yada yada yada. The important idea here is, of course, for 2 mana you would get to create 2 token copies, which is crazy good. Next, I want to talk about a subset of cards, aka I think it's just 2 cards, that are quite unique in what they do. It is Soulbright Flamekin and Soulbright Seeker. They kind of do the same thing. They're both elementals that you can play for cheap, and for 2 mana or 1 red mana respectively, they give target creature trample until end of turn. If this ability has resolved the 3rd time this turn, you then get a bunch of mana. So in the case of Soulbright Seeker, you activate it for 1 red, and at the end you get 4 red if you activate it 3 times. Soulbright Flamekin, the ability costs 2 to activate, but you get 8 red mana out of it. The idea here is, well, you pay 3 to get 4, or you play 6 to get 8. Quite simple. With Ertha Joe, thankfully this ability targets just a single creature, which means you get to copy that ability. Meaning instead of paying 6, you just need to pay 4 in the case of Soulbright Flamekin, and just 2 for Soulbright Seeker to get the mana out of these guys. Before we talk about the big kicker card that everybody would love to play, let's talk about Lithoform Engine. 4 mana, legendary artifact, 2 and tap to copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. For 3 and tap, you get to copy an instant or sorcery. For 4 and tap, you get to copy a permanent spell. Now, the card that came to mind once I understood that Ertha Joe can copy abilities to target players is Mindslaver. Now, Mindslaver has an activated ability, it costs 6 to play, where for 4 and tapping and sacrificing Mindslaver, you control target players next turn. Now, if you copy that ability, you get to copy 3 out of 4 players at the table for the next turns, yourself and 2 opponents. If you have a Lithoform Engine, well, I mean, Magic is a game that is supposed to be played with others, but why not play it all on your own? I think Mindslaver is probably the most fun thing you can do. Maybe not for others, but for yourself. I just have this vision of a turn where I get to control every single player, and that I enjoy quite a lot. General Ferrous Rokiric is a 3 mana 3/1 human soldier. It has hexproof from monocolored, and whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. This guy gives us a bunch of hints, and it comes with a very useful line of text that we can mostly ignore. Casting multicolored spells is not that difficult. Split mana makes it so you don't even need to have a good mana base. If you play a card like Integrity that has a Boros split red mana, just a single mana pip as cost, you get an instant that gives a creature +2/+2, but of course more importantly, you get a 1 mana card that triggers your General Ferrous. There's other really good red and white creatures, like, I don't know, Tori I'm not gonna pronounce that word, Fury Rider, a 4-mana 3/3 Vigilance Trample. When it attacks, other attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Red attacking creatures gain Trample until end of turn, and then you untap each other white attacking creature you control. Of course, the golem tokens you make are red and white, so there's some nice synergy. Blade Historian is a 4-mana 2/3 that gives attacking creatures you control double strike. If it comes with a 4/4 red and white golem token, that's very nice. Balefire Liege comes from a cycle of Lorwyn cards that has 2 colors. For 2 and 3 split mana, you get a 2/4 Spirit Horror. Red creatures get +1/+1, white creatures get +1/+1. And whenever you cast a red spell, this guy deals 3 damage to target player, and whenever you play a white spell, you gain 3 life. One other genre of cards that is multiple colors is fuse cards. Now, fuse cards, maybe the most popular one is Wear and Tear. Is a card that has kind of 2 cards stapled onto it. Wear, 2 mana, destroy target artifact. Tear, 1 mana, destroy target enchantment. If you choose to cast one of these sides of the card, it will have all the attributes of that side. But fuse is a little line of text added at the bottom that says you may cast both halves of this card from your hand, and if you cast both halves of this card from your hand, then you kind of combine the attributes of both. So it will be a red and white 3 mana instant that you're casting. And of course, if it's red and white, it triggers General Ferrous Rokiric, while still being a quite useful card in any scenario. Now, that is enough talk about red and white creatures. I think you get the point. But whenever you read Golem, you need to remember that there is actually a subtype of creatures that cares about golems. Maybe most famously known, Blade Splicer is a 3 mana 1/1 that also comes with a golem. Sure, it is a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian golem, not a 4/4 red and white golem, but Blade Splicer makes up for it because it gives golems you control first strike, which is quite nice. It's not the only card though that synergizes with golems. There's also Darksteel Splicer, 7 mana 1/1. Whenever it or another non-token Phyrexian enters the battlefield, you create X 3/3 colorless Phyrexian golem artifact creature token. That is a mouthful, where X is the number of opponents you have. So usually it comes with 3 golems. And then golems you control have indestructible. That's pretty sick. The last thing I want to point out is how susceptibly useful the first line of text here on General Ferrous Rokiric is. If we think about the most common removal spells in the format, most of them are monocolored, especially if you're playing precon level slightly above. The most common removal spells and interaction in general is those very generic cards like Beast Within, Chaos Warp, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile. What do all of these cards have in common? They're monocolored. So even though it is a 3 mana creature that has 1 toughness, I think this guy might actually stick around for quite a while. Hofri Ghostforge is a 5 mana 4/5 dwarf cleric. It gives spirits you control +1/+1 and trample as well as haste, which are just awesome keywords. Additionally, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's a spirit in addition to its other types, and it has, when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to your graveyard. We're gonna take the easy pointer first. Commander says spirit, let's look at some spirit synergies. From the same set, of course, we can expect some support in the form of Quintorius Field Historian, a 5 mana 2/4 that gives spirits you control +1/+0. Additionally, whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. This means whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if you have both of these cards out, you get a copy of the creature that just died, but you'll also get a 3/2 red and white spirit creature tokens, and then both of these tokens that you just created would get +2/+1 trample and haste. That's pretty nice. Staff of the Storyteller, also quite nice. 2 mana artifact. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with fly. Whenever you create 1 or more creature tokens, you put a story counter on Staff of Storytellers. And then for white and tap, remove a story counter from Staff to draw a card. This card, I've played it in Vintage Cube, draws you a lot of cards, especially because your commander creates tokens. Spirit Bonds Also quite useful, as it makes it so for 2 mana you get an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control enters the battlefield, you can pay 1 white. If you do, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. But you don't even need to do that, technically. You can also make use of the second part of this card, which reads for 2 mana, and sacrificing a spirit, target non-spirit creature gains indestructible until end of turn. You know who isn't a spirit? Hofri Ghostforge, your commander, which you would very much like to protect. The last card I want to talk about in regards to spirit synergy is Clash of Realities. If we're thinking spirits, it's an enchantment that reads all spirits have. When this creature comes into play, you may have it deal 3 damage to target non-spirit creature, and all non-spirit creatures have. When this creature comes into play, you may have it deal 3 damage to target spirit. I'm not sure if this card is even remotely playable, it doesn't feel like it, but it looked interesting enough for me to consider it. We've talked about spirit synergies, but of course that isn't what Hofri is limited to. After all, it just cares about non-token creatures dying. The easiest way to have non-token creatures die is to play cards that can sacrifice themselves, and there's a couple of really good ones. Alseid of Life's Bounty. For 1 mana and sacrificing it, you get to give target creature or enchantment you control protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So it's here to protect Hofri itself. In a similar vein, Benevolent Bodyguard, 1 mana 1/1, sacrifice a target creature you control and gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. You do it and you kind of get a 2-for-1 out of this deal. Not only do you get to protect Hofri, but you also get the spirit copy, so you could technically do it again. There's a couple more of these cards, I'm sure you'll find them yourself. Another card that works quite nicely is stuff like Catalyst Elemental. It's a 3 mana 2/2 that you can sacrifice to add 2 red. Of course, technically the idea here is you play it on turn 3 and then turn 4 it gives you a mana boost. If you have Hofri out though, you could sacrifice it immediately to get 2 red. You get a spirit copy that you sacrifice again, and the turn you played, you're up 1 mana, so it kind of acts as a ritual, which is nice. But we also know that red has a million sacrifice outlets. The best one we talked about, Goblin Bombardments, and that means really you are mostly restricted to good ETBs, and in this case, for the first time, we've had a lot of stuff where this didn't work, also good attack triggers. Tercel Light Shatter, 3 mana 3/3 haste when it enters, discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards, that's perfectly fine, but whenever it attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, exile a card at random from a graveyard, you may play that card this turn. It's nice card advantage, and here really the world is your oyster again. There's a million good ETBs, there's a million good attack triggers. You could even play cards that care about hitting opponents, because both trample and haste make it much more likely you'll get a hit onto a player. So yeah, I think Hofri is quite versatile, and there's a lot of things that you can do to express your own deck building process here. Next in line is Kellan the Fae-Blooded, a 3 mana 2/2. It's a human fairy, and it comes as a 2-parter because you can send Kellan on an adventure. For 2 mana, you get a sorcery that searches your library for an aura or equipment card, and you can then put it into your hand. Now this is pretty nice. It means you can consistently get your best aura or equipment before even playing your commander. But then Kellan itself is also not too shabby. 3 mana double strike. Other creatures you control get +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to Kellan the Fae-Blooded. Here, if we dissect it, we have a tutor for an artifact or aura. I mean, there is not too much to talk about here. You're just gonna get the best stuff all the time. And then the creature itself has double strike, which is extremely potent. It buffs your team, which means you want to go wide. And then you want to also go wide with auras and equipment. So some of the cards could be applied here that also applied for Bruenor Battlehammer. I still think Bludgeon Brawl, Gemcutter Buccaneer, Togo, Arterial Alchemy, all of these cards are still quite good here if you choose to go the equipment route. We've talked about equipments a bunch though, so I wanted to talk more about auras. There's not too much here. Of course, if you're playing auras, if you decide to go that route, you're playing Core Spirit Dancer, 2 mana 0/2, gets +2/+2 for each aura attached to it, and whenever you cast an aura spell, you may draw a card. In a deck like Kellan, you might end up not attaching any auras to Core Spirit Dancer, but instead just use it to draw cards. Certainly possible. What auras are you getting? Well, if we're starting small, Cartouche of Solidarity is very nice. because it gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 and first strike, which, I mean, first strike, Kellan can't make use of, but +1/+1 for 1 mana is nice. But it also comes with a 1/1 warrior creature token with vigilance, which of course will get buffed by Kellan's static ability, giving +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to it. If we're thinking a little bigger, Element Mastery is a 4 mana aura that reads enchanted creature has tap, create X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste, where X is this creature's power. Exile them at beginning of next end step. Here we can see a shift of just one card that makes it so instead of going for commander damage, which is usually your approach, you can go super duper wide, which is very useful if for some reason Kellan gets stonewalled. And here, let's say we have 4 or 5 auras attached to Kellan, and it has whatever 8 power. You instead get to create 8 1/1s that get either +4 or +5 +0, depending on how much stuff is attached to Kellan. I wanted to talk about one more aura because I think it's quite absurd, and that is Tempest Technique, a 4 mana aura that gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. Now we've seen an effect like this. It usually costs 1. Why is this card so good? Well, because it has Storm. Yes, Storm not attached to an instant or sorcery, but instead to an aura. Meaning, for each spell cast before Tempest Technique this turn, you get to create a copy, a token copy of this aura. Let's assume you've played 2 spells before Tempest Technique. That means you get 3 Tempest Techniques, each of them giving +3/+3 at the very least to Kellan. And then the sky is the limit if we're thinking of, you know, a bigger turn where maybe even someone else plays a spell, because remember, Storm also triggers off of opponents casting spells. The last thing I want to talk about though is, yes, we've talked about auras, but I believe that Kellan is the key to building a Sunforger deck. Now, Sunforger is an equipment that spawns and deserves its own category on EDH because sometimes your commander is not actually the card your deck is built around. Sunforger is a 3 mana equipment that gives the equipped creature +4/+0 and it equips for 3. Now that is nothing special, nothing enticing, but for 2 mana, a red and a white, and unattaching Sunforger, you get to search a library for a red and white instant card with converted mana cost 4 or less, and cast that card without paying its mana cost. Sunforger decks run into the issue of not having Sunforger, because unfortunately Sunforger is not a legendary creature, nor can you put equipments, even if they were legendary, into your command zone. But Kellan is that. The adventure searching your library for an equipment makes it so you can consistently have Sunforger in your hand and thus build your entire deck around Sunforger. Now, there is a whole slew of problems that come with it. Of course, whenever we're talking hidden commanders, your Sunforger will still get destroyed and you can't put it back into the command zone. But if you want to give it a try, if you are in for that kind of toolbox-esque deck building challenge that Sunforger provides, go ahead and choose Kellan the Fae-Blooded as your commander. The next card also stems from Lawman Eclipsed. It's a 3 mana 3/3 Vampire Cleric, and it only has one effect, but that one packs quite the punch. You get to tap 2 untapped creatures you control as the cost to activate it, and then you copy target triggered ability you control, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Activate only once each turn. The first comparison I drew was to Ertha Joe, a 4 mana commander that we've talked about, that whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, you copy that ability. So both of these commanders are in the business of copying abilities. There is a stark difference here though, as in Ertha cares about activated abilities, whereas Kirol only cares about triggered abilities. Yes, we've seen good triggered abilities in this video. Duke Ulder Ravengard has an insane triggered ability. Evangel of Heliod has an insane triggered ability. Ancient Gold Dragon, I'm not sure if we've talked about it in this video, but yes, whenever you deal combat damage to a player, rolling a d20 and creating that many 1/1 blue fairy dragons, that's pretty powerful. If you get to double that effect, that's pretty good. There's also, you know, Aki Battle Squad, 6 mana 6/6. Whenever 1 or more modified creatures you control attack, untap all modified creatures you control. After this combat, there is an additional combat. But I think the secret in unlocking Kirol is blinking him and other creatures. Because the most common type of trigger nowadays, I would say, is a good old ETB. Avenger of Heliod, creating 1/1s, easy peasy. Something like Impact Tremors if we're thinking small, but yeah, just doubling up the 1 damage dealt to each opponent, that's not that powerful. And white is the color, maybe together with blue, to blink stuff. Felidar Guardian, 4 mana 1/4. Whenever it enters, you may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Easy peasy. Restoration Angel does pretty much the same, except you can only exile a non-angel creature you control. But these guys do two things. First of all, they reset your Kirol. Unfortunately, as a safety valve, you can only activate his ability once, but if you blink him, his memory is wiped and you get to do it again. In a more straightforward way, if you're playing a bunch of cards like Avenger of Heliod, you could simply blink them and then create another one of those powerful triggers to then copy again with Kirol. Heck, if we talk about Aki Battle Squad, he also has an triggers only once each turn clause. Blink him and he will immediately forget all the aggressions that you've committed towards other players. Pretty neat. Kirol is so open-ended that it kind of doesn't make sense for me to go into too much detail, because really it is up to you to choose what you want to do. Do you want to go infinite with ETBs, with Felidar Guardian blinking Restoration Angel, blinking Felidar Guardian? Do you really want to harp down on ETBs or on attack triggers or on hit player triggers? The only last thing that I want to mention is activate only once each turn is a clause that doesn't limit you as much as you might think. Because in Commander, in a turn cycle, there's 4 turns. That means if you manage to have stuff enter the battlefield during opponent's turns, maybe because you have Flash, or maybe because you play stuff like Flicker Wisp, which you flicker with Felidar Guardian, I don't know, then really this is the way to make it so you get the most out of your Kirol Attentive first year. Next on the chopping block is Kaladin the Triumph Caster. He's a red and white 2/3 human pilot for 2 mana. Mounts and vehicles you control have haste. Whenever a mount you control enters, it becomes saddled until end of turn. And whenever a vehicle you control enters, it becomes an artifact until end of turn. We've talked a bit about vehicles already. I want to use this section of the video to talk a bit about mounts. Thankfully, in Aetherdrift, Wizards took precautions and made a few cards that work both with mounts and vehicles, because they just knew that mounts wasn't a standalone mechanic yet. Alacrian Armory is a 4-mana artifact that gives creatures you control +0/+1 and Vigilance. Additionally, at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target mount or vehicle you control. Until end of turn, that permanent becomes saddled if it's a mount, and it becomes an artifact creature if it's a vehicle. Cloudspire Coordinator is a 2-mana 3/1 human pilot, and when this creature enters you scry 2, you can tap it to create X 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens, where X is the number of mounts and or vehicles that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. The tokens have this token saddles mounts and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. This serves a similar function to your commander. I mean, your commander does it himself, but Cloudspire Coordinator means that you will most likely be able to crew all of your stuff. I wanted to talk about 2 mounts that are actually good in my opinion. Bulwark Ox is a 2-mana 2/2. When this creature attacks while saddled, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on any target creature. And it has a Selfless Spirit effect, sacrifices this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This means it's even better than Selfless Spirit in some cases, aka against targeted removal spells. The only mount that had me really excited though, at least in this color combination, is Guardian Sunmare. Guardian Sunmare is a 5-mana 5/5 horse mount. It has War 2, which is pretty important for a 5-drop in my opinion. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search a library for a non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Guardian Sunmare is actually a really powerful effect. A 5-drop that comes down with haste, assuming you have your commander out, and then tutors for a 3-drop and puts it onto the battlefield. That's actually a powerful move. Unfortunately, this is not a 60-card constructed format where you could be playing 4 Kaladins and 4 Sunmares, so it might not be enough for a commander deck in and of itself, but it's something to look out for. It's Mabel, heir to Crag Flame. She's a 3-mana 3/3 mouse soldier, and she gives other mice you control +1/+1. Whenever Mabel enters the battlefield, you create Crag Flame, a legendary colorless equipment artifact token with equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance, trample, and haste. It equips for 2 generic mana. Usually, when you build a deck like Equipments or let's say Aristocrats, you have a classic wrong half issue. Now, wrong half issue is something that everybody who plays like Spellslinger or Aristocrats knows. You have different types of cards in your decks. For a good equipment deck, you need good equipments, like let's say Commander's Blade. You also need creatures that wield your equipment, let's say a core duelist. And you also should play some payoffs for having equipments, like SRAM Senior Edificer. Now this means you have 3 different types of cards. In some games, you will draw only equipments and you won't really have any creatures to equip them to. Sometimes you'll draw only the payoffs and have no equipments to play. Usually a fix to this problem is to give your commander one of those roles. Most equipment commanders serve as a payoff for equipments and as a target for your equipments. So they almost take 2 slots in your deck, and you really only need good equipments, but then of course you're super committed to Voltron. While Mabel is also an equipment commander, she serves a completely different function in your deck. Instead of cutting down the payoffs and the creatures to equip equipments to, in a Mabel deck, you can afford to cut down the number of equipments you're playing, which is quite unique in my opinion. Now, of course, you create a legendary equipment token that only comes down once and it can only equip to 1 creature. So you shouldn't skip out on equipments completely, but it does mean that cards like Core Duelist, Fervent Champion, or maybe a Stonehaven Outfitter become much more reliable. Because even if your hand contains only lands and a Fervent Champion, a Core Duelist, and a Stonehaven Outfitter, Mabel will provide one of those equipments that you so desperately need. I wanted to also mention one more payoff. I think Zamriel's Seraph of Steel, a 4-mana 3/4 angel, is quite powerful. She's flying because she's an angel, and as long as it's your turn, equipped creatures you control have indestructible. Together with all of these legendary creatures that I have showcased already and will showcase during this video, I'm sure that Mabel can serve as quite a nice commander for a equipment strategy that is built in a different way than pretty much every other equipment commander in this color combination. Next in line is Mila, Crafty Companion, one of those 2-faced commanders from Strixhaven that have a front side and a back side. On the front side, Mila is a 3-mana 2/3, a white creature fox. Whenever an opponent attacks 1 or more planeswalkers you control, put a loyalty counter on each planeswalker you control. And whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. This is, I think, quite an easy one to solve. It's quite literally Super Friends, but white and red. If you want to build a Gideon/Chandra tribal deck, I think you can put Mila as your commander, and it will always do what it's designed to do. I want to talk about the backside of this card though. Luca, Wayward Bonder, a 6-mana planeswalker that comes down with 5 loyalty. For its +1, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. If a creature card was discarded this way, draw 2 cards instead. For -2, you return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and you exile it at beginning of your next upkeep. For its -7, you get an emblem with, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. This commander does a few things. Its +1 is one of those like looting effects. You discard a card, put it into your graveyard, and then draw 1 or even 2 cards. So it's either card selection or card advantage. Its -2 is a sneak attack / through the breach type effect. But you get to keep the card around until your next upkeep, which might be relevant in case the creature has vigilance, for example. Also, its -7 acts as a Warstorm Surge. The way I would approach Luca though is as a white-red sneak attack from your command zone. Over the course of Magic's history, we've seen a few effects that act as a sneak attack. like effect. If you don't know, sneak attack, 4 mana enchantment. For 1 red mana, you choose a creature card from your hand, you put it into play, it gains haste, but you need to sacrifice the creature at the end of your turn. Now, Through the Breach, for example, is an instant variant of this. 5 mana instant, put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, that creature gains haste, sacrifice that creature at the beginning of your next end step. So the typical way you would use these cards is at the end of your opponent's turn, you use this effect and then attack them with a huge beater. There's more cards that do this. Ferrous, for example, has a 3 mana sneak attack that only works on red creatures. In Lorwyn Eclipsed, we also got Meek Attack, which is obviously an homage. 3 mana for 1 generic and a red. You may put a creature card with total power and toughness 5 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. So really you see there's a high density of effects like this, which makes me think that there might be a deck out there that is literally just Luca as a sneak attack in addition to your actual sneak attacks and Ferrous. What are we sneaking into the field here? Well, for example, you could be cheating an Ilharg the Raised Boar into the battlefield. 5 mana 6/6, whenever it attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Should Ilharg die or be exiled, you may put it into its owner's library 3rd from the top. Of course, you could also be cheating into play Aurelia the War Leader. She's a 6 mana 3/4 angel, flying vigilance haste, and whenever it attacks for the first time, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. Personal favorite of mine is Arni Metal Brow, a 3 mana 3/3 human berserker. And whenever a creature you control attacks or a creature enters the battlefield under your control attacking, you may pay a generic and a red. If you do, you may put a creature card with mana value less than that creature's mana value from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And of course, whenever a creature enters under your control attacking, you can pay the 2 again. So this really cascades all the creatures in your hand onto the battlefield attacking, and I think that's a super sweet effect. It is all about subtle nuances in Boros, because Nahiri is another equipment commander, but she rewards quite different deck building decisions than all the other commanders. Nahiri costs 6, is a 5/4 core artificer, but you're not ever going to pay 6 mana ideally, because she has affinity for equipments. That means for each equipment you control, Nahiri costs 1 less to cast. Remember that this also cheats on command text should Nahiri have died previously. Whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and you may cast equipment spells this way without paying their mana cost. So whenever an equipped creature attacks, you exile the top card. If it's an equipment, you even get to cheat it into play for free. Not at instant speed, you still have to respect the timing restrictions, but that's still pretty good. Now, why am I saying Nahiri rewards quite different deck building decisions? Again, usually you have a commander that is a payoff for playing equipments or having equipped creatures. And then you have creatures and equipments. For Nahiri, ideally, you want equipments and creatures stapled onto the same cards. And Magic has provided at least 2 mechanics that do exactly that. Netocist, for example, is a living weapon. That means this 3 mana equipment enters attached to a 0/0 Phyrexian Germ creature token. And that means not only does it discount Nahiri, not only is it a good payoff for having just any equipments lying around, it also triggers Nahiri the turn after you play it. And should you hit it with Nahiri, you can cast it for cheap. If we're thinking living weapon, of course there's also Batter Skull and a couple of others. But there's a second mechanic where equipments are closely connected to creatures, and that is for Mirrodin from the set Phyrexia All Will Be One. Now these equipments don't come attached to 0/0s, but instead to 2/2 rebels. Let's look at Dragonwing Glider, for example. The 5 mana equipment. When this equipment enters, create a 2/2 red rebel creature token, then attach this equipment to it. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and haste. The normal equip costs are 5, but of course, it comes attached already. Hexblade Wallbreaker is another 5 mana equipment that comes attached to a 2/2 rebel. It gives the creature +2/+2, and whenever the equipped creature attacks, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, untap each other attacking creature, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. Equip 4. All of these cards are nice and all, but there's not enough of them to go around, so of course you're still gonna be playing your normal equipment creatures and payoffs. One thing that I do want to highlight though is that Nahiri, unlike all of these other equipment commanders, cares about the top card of your library. And if you see the line top card of your library, you of course have to think of Senses Divining Top and Scroll Rack, 2 artifacts that manipulate the top of your library, so you can more easily cheat expensive equipments into play. For me, personally, the dream would probably be to have a Sigarda's Aid out. If you don't know what Sigarda's Aid does, it's a 1-mana enchantment, and you may cast aura and equipment spells as though they had flash. And whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach it to a creature you control. This could mean that you attack with, let's say, a Dragon Wing Glider, a Hexblade, and a Nettlecyst. Nahiri triggers, exiling 3 cards from the top of your library. Those 3 cards could potentially be 3 equipments, and Sigarda's Aid of course would allow you to play them at instant speed, because you can ignore the usual timing restrictions, they all have flash, and then you get to equip them for free even before your creatures hit the opponent. I know that's the dream scenario, but I mean, Commander is the format where you dream big or go home. Next in line, we go back to tokens. Najali or Najali is a 4-mana 3/3 human rebel. Attacking tokens you control have double strike. Whenever 1 or more tokens you control attack a player, exile the top card of your library. During any turn you attacked with a token, you may play that card. There is different ways to approach this commander. I mean, yes, you are going to play Intangible Virtue, 2 mana, creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and Vigilance. That's just good in any token deck. Yes, you're gonna play Idol of Oblivion, 2 mana, tap to draw a card, activate only if you created a token this turn. Obvious, it's good in any token deck. Then we can make slight deviations to, let's say, a go wide strategy. Because remember, double strike is more effective the more power your creatures have. So if you have a 1/1 that has double strike, it's much less effective than if you have, let's say, a 4/4. That doesn't mean you can't go wide. You can go wide and give a bunch of Anthem effects to all of your creatures like Intangible Virtue. But of course, you could also take it in a direction where you create a bunch of larger tokens. A well-known payoff is, for example, Divine Visitation, which just swaps out all creature tokens you would create with 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance. Giving those double strike is quite good for obvious reasons. A personal favorite card of mine is Dragon Master Outcast. It's a 1-drop and a 1/1, so it's quite unassuming, but at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. In Commander, I think a card like this is the perfect 1-mana card. In general, I wouldn't recommend playing too many 1-mana cards because they fall off in the late game quite heavily. But this is also a format where no one ever does anything on turn 1 except play a Soul Ring if they have one. Dragon Master Outcast not only is a good 1-drop, because if you have it in your starting hand, you just play it, it sits there until it does something. If you draw it later in the game, it is a pretty high priority target to remove, because those 5/5 red dragons with double strike, they're gonna hit like a truck. We can talk about so many more cards here. I'm gonna mention just 2 more. First of all, Prava of the Steel Legion is quite an interesting card. It's a 3-mana 1/4 that has partners, so you could be playing this as your commander also, in addition to another card. And as long as it's your turn, it gives creature tokens you control +1/+4, and it can also, for 4 mana, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Now, I'm not sure how good this is in a Najali deck, because +1/+4 is not the stat line you'd want to give those tokens. +4/+1 would be much more desirable, but it might still play a nice defense role. Lastly, I want to talk about Seance, a 4-mana enchantment, and at the beginning of each upkeep, you may exile target creature card from your graveyard. If you do, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that card, except it's a spirit in addition to its other types. exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Let's talk about the obvious problem with this card. The creature doesn't get haste. So this is mostly here to trigger ETBs, but I wanted to highlight it as a good way to get high value tokens into play. Red also is the color that has the easiest time giving haste to all creatures. I would usually price this effect at around 3 mana. Could be on a card like Tuk-Tuk's Rumbleford, 3 mana 0/3, creatures you control with haste, but of course there's so many more like Anger and whatnot. Still, I think it's a good card that you should consider in some decks, although it might not be good enough as a standalone card in an Ajani deck. And then whether you go wide or you go tall really is up to you. Of course, we've mentioned a couple of cards that just create token copies like Orthian, Hero of Lavabrink, and a commander that we're going to talk about later, Osgir the Reconstructor. By later, I mean now. Osgir the Reconstructor is a 4 mana 4/4 giant artificer. It has vigilance, and for 1 generic and sacrificing an artifact, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. For X and tapping Osgir, you exile an artifact with mana value X or less from your graveyard, and then you create 2 tokens that are copies of the exiled card. Activate only as a sorcery. Might be the degenerate in me speaking, but whenever I see an effect where you pay X to exile a card from your graveyard, I'm thinking of cards that have 0 mana value. I'm thinking of, well, Mishra's Bauble is a good example of a card that you can play early on, sacrifice it, and then get 2 copies of with Osgir. But there's also these cards that don't have mana cost, and thus their mana value is 0, because they're not intended to just be played. Lotus Bloom, I think most people know, it is a black lotus that usually you suspend for 0 and then you wait 3 turns. So if you have it in your graveyard, well, Osgir can just give you 2 copies. Soul Talisman is a soul ring that is technically meant to be suspended on turn 1, and you wait 3 turns, then you get it. Osgir, for just 0 mana and tapping it, can give you 2 soul rings. There's multiple ways to get artifacts into your graveyard. Of course, Osgir can sacrifice those artifacts and put them into your graveyard, which means technically I think you're gonna be playing a bunch of cards like Ichor Wellspring, cards that do something when they enter, and cards that do something when they leave the battlefield. Those are perfect targets for his first sacrifice ability, and then if you need value later on in the game, you can recur them using your same commander that sacrificed them. And if you want to go a bit bigger, I think cards like Mindslaver are really fun targets. Mindslaver, of course, being a 6 mana artifact where for 4 and tap you sacrifice it and you gain control of target player's next turn. Gaining 2 copies of Mindslaver means you get to control 66% of the turn cycle, or even 100% of the turn cycle if you're in a 3-player match. And I mean, that's a power move if I've ever seen one, to control the entire table for a turn. The game has probably ended the turn you activate those Mindslavers. Next in line, we have Plarg, Dean of Chaos, a 2 mana 2/2 that taps to discard a card and draw a card, and for 5 mana you get to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary non-land card with mana value 3 or less, and you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put all revealed cards not cast this way onto the bottom of your library in a random order. This commander uses Osgir nicely as a segue, as of course whenever you read this kind of cascade-like effect where you just reveal cards from the top of your library again and again and again until you find mana value X or less, you should think of cards like Lotus Bloom, we just talked about, or these non-artifact suspend cards that also have mana value 0. You could be playing this as a Restore Balance deck. Restore Balance being each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player with the fewest lands, then sacrifices the rest and does the same for creatures and cards in hand. You could be playing this as a Resurgent Belief deck. Resurgent Belief, return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. You could be playing this as a Glimpse of Tomorrow deck. Shuffle all permanents you own into your library, then reveal that many cards from the top of your library. We'll put all non-aura permanent cards revealed this way onto the battlefield, and then do the same for aura cards, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in any random order. I don't think you would be playing all 3 of those cards in any given deck, because you would probably like to have the consistency of this effect, but that is what I would do with Plarg. The way that you supplement this, of course, is with cards that have higher mana value than you're ever gonna pay for them. For example, split cards like Dead Gone that you can play on turn 1 or 2, even though their mana value technically is 4, or cards that have Warp or Delve. I wanted to talk though about the other side of Plarg, Dean of Chaos. Yes, it's a Strixhaven card. Yes, it has a backside. In my opinion, more interesting is Augusta, Dean of Order, a 3 mana 1/3. She reads, other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0, and other untapped creatures you control get +0/+1. Whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. At first, it might not be obvious why this commander doesn't just give your creatures vigilance, but then again, maybe it is. Tap creatures you control get +1/+0. Of course, if you want to full swing, if you want to kill an opponent, it's quite nice to give them +1/+0. If you just want to chip in for some damage but want to leave your creatures up, you're gonna untap all of your creatures and then give them +0/+1. Now, there is an additional upside to this than just pseudo vigilance, and that is cards that care about becoming tapped. There is a couple of examples. Magda, Brazen Outlaw, is a very famous CEDH commander, also I think. 2 mana, 2/1. Other dwarves you control get +1/+0. Yes, okay, but whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. You also have the ability to sacrifice 5 treasures to search a library for an artifact or dragon card and cheat it into play. Now, usually you would get in with your Magda and maybe one more dwarf, you create that 1 treasure token. If you have Augusta out, you get in, you still tap them to attack, then you untap them, and then if you choose, you can tap them again and create additional treasure tokens. That's quite nice. Another subtype of cards that really appreciates this being untapping and then tapping again instead of vigilance is the Merfolk from Lorwyn, Stony Brook Schoolmaster, a 3 mana 1/2. Whenever it becomes tapped, you may put a 1/1 blue Merfolk wizard creature token into play. From recent Lorwyn Eclipsed, we got the Encumbered Reejerey, a 2 mana 5/4 that enters with 3 -1/-1 counters on it. But whenever this creature becomes tapped, if it has a -1/-1 counter on it, you get to remove 1. That means you play the Encumbered Reejerey on turn 2, it is technically still a 2/1, then you play Augusta on turn 3, you get in with your Reejerey, remove the first counter with the first attack, then you untap it, then you can tap it again, and voila, it's a 4/3. Might not be good enough to make a commander deck, but it's a sweet synergy I want to point out. Archangel of Tithes is an interesting one. It's a 4 mana 3/5 flying. As long as it's untapped, creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. And as long as it's attacking, creatures can't block unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. Now you would expect this to be a mirrored effect, so one saying as long as it's untapped do this, as long as it's tapped do this. But that's not what this card actually says. It says if it's untapped you get one effect, and if it's attacking you get the other effect. That means with Augusta, you can simply use her to untap your Archangel of Tithes and you'll benefit off of both effects simultaneously. That's pretty sweet. The next commander on this list is very unique. It's Queen Kayla bin-Kroog, a 3 mana 2/3 human noble. She has 1 line of text, but it is quite impactful. It's an activated ability. For 4 and tapping Queen Kayla, you discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. You may choose an artifact or creature card with mana value 1, 2, and 3 from the cards you discarded this way, and you return those cards to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. I think there's several approaches to build around this commander. One approach certainly is just to play the best 1, 2, and 3 mana creatures and artifacts. What my job is, in my opinion, is to find the more exciting ways to utilize a commander's ability. Whenever you put something into play rather than cast it, you can ignore a couple of things. For example, lines of text that make it so you can't cast something. Like Seraph Avenger, a 2 mana 3/3 flying vigilance, which is quite powerful, but you can't cast it during the first, second, or third turn of the game. Of course, with Kayla, you could just activate the ability and put Seraph Avenger into play as a 2 mana 3/3 vigilance flying. You can also ignore additional costs, like for Guardian of the Great Door, a 2 mana 4/4 flying. where as additional cost, you need to tap 4 untapped artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control. Or Dusk Rose Reliquary, an artifact removal spell. For 1, when it enters, you exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls. It has ward 2, which is quite nice, but as additional cost, you need to sacrifice an artifact or creature. These are the types of cards that benefit quite a lot from you getting to ignore additional costs and other lines of text. Let's talk about some other cards that benefit off of being discarded. Madness cards. Red has quite a few, I'm sure you're gonna find them. I wanted to talk about a white card, Frantic Purification, 3 mana instant destroy target enchantment. It has Madness for just a white. When you discard this card, you can play it while discarding it. So that's also a direction you could take this. One really cool card is Library of Leng, a 1 mana artifact that reads you have no maximum hand size, and I know Commander players love that line of text even if it never comes up. And if an effect causes you to discard a card, you still discard it, which is important for your commander, but you may put it on top of your library instead of into your graveyard. Now this means, let's say you have 3 or 4 cards that are potentially interesting to discard and put into play with Queen Kayla's ability, but you also have that one card that you would much rather draw again. That means Library of Leng is your best friend and you can just discard it and put it on top of your library. Let's talk about other discard payoffs. Currency Converter bears quite a hefty price tag, unfortunately. It's a 1 mana artifact. Whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. For 2 and tap, you draw a card, then discard a card. And for just tapping the Currency Converter, put a card exiled with Currency Converter into your graveyard. If it's a land card, create a treasure token. If it's a non-land card, create a 2/2 black rogue creature token. It's just a good payoff. Remember, even though this does exile cards from your graveyard, it is voluntarily, and you're never just gonna discard a 1, 2, and 3 mana card. There's gonna be some lands as well that you can make good use of with Currency Converter. Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, also a very powerful payoff, a 2 mana 2/2 Human Knight. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library, you may play that card until your next turn. So whenever you activate Queen Kayla, you get some more card advantage. Personally, I could also see this commander being taken in a bit of a Storm or at least Eggs type deck, where you play a bunch of Chromatic Spheres and Chromatic Stars. You play them for cheap, activating Kayla, they go into your graveyard if you don't play them or if you sacrifice them. And then later in the game, you are casting a second Sunrise to return all of them and do some crazy shenanigans, potentially winning with stuff like Approach of the Second Sun that you could just draw into with Queen immediately after casting it. Quintorius Loremaster is a 5 mana 3/5 Elephant Cleric with Vigilance. At the beginning of your end step, exile target non-creature non-land card from your graveyard and create a 3/2 red-white spirit creature token. For 3, a generic, a red and a white, and tapping Quintorius as well as sacrificing a spirit, choose target card exiled with Quintorius. You may cast that card this turn without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into a graveyard, put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead. I think this guy is just here so you can Faithless Looting, let's say an Avacyn's Memorial, 8 mana, indestructible, other legendary permanents you control have indestructible. Abraxas Bounty, 6 mana, for each land you control create a treasure token. Or maybe just a Divine Intervention into your graveyard, and on turn 5, or potentially earlier on turn 4, you drop Quintorius and you cheat one of those crazy high mana value payoffs into play. There's not much else I want to talk about. There's another Quintorius that also makes more spirit tokens. Of course, you don't need to sacrifice those 3/2 spirit tokens. You can just use a generic 1/1 white flying spirit tokens. For example, the ones that are created by spirit bonds. Favorite card that I want to cast at one point during a commander game. Divine Intervention is an 8 mana enchantment that enters the battlefield with 2 counters on it. During your upkeep, you remove a counter, and once the last counter is removed, the game is over and considered a draw. Well, that is certainly one way to subvert expectations and make only one person feel like a winner and the rest like they wasted their time. One of my favorite flavor wins in Boros is Ragost the Deft Gastronaut. This guy is a 2-mana 2/2 lobster citizen. Artifacts you control are foods in addition to their other types, and have 2 generic, sacrifice and tap this artifact, you gain 3 life. Ragost itself can also sacrifice foods by paying 1 and tapping him, and Ragost deals 3 damage to each opponent. Also, at the beginning of each end step, if you gained life this turn, untap Ragost. The idea here is, of course, that you have these foods, you sacrifice them to untap Ragost, or you sacrifice them to deal 3 to each opponent, but I think we'll need to deviate from this game plan a little. Let's talk about a few things first. I want to start with that middle line of text. Sacrifice a food, Ragost deals 3 damage to each opponent. Remember that all your artifacts are foods in addition to the other types, so there's some sweet cards that generally like to be sacrificed. Chromatic Star, a often mentioned example. Price Statue as an example of one of those cards that do something when they enter, but also when they are put into a graveyard, aka they are sacrificed to Ragost. There's a couple of more things that are to be considered here. Slagstone Refinery is a 4-mana artifact that rewards you for putting a bunch of artifacts into your graveyard, because whenever it or another non-token artifact you control are put into a graveyard from the battlefield or into exile from the battlefield, you create a tapped Power Stone token. Now, a Power Stone can either be used to activate abilities or to cast artifact spells. This will make sure that when you cycle your chromatic stars and such, you will always have the mana to do so. When you have the ability to sacrifice something on your commander, I would at least consider stealing some of your opponent's stuff. The perfect card here is Treasure Nabber, a 3-mana 3/2 goblin rogue, and whenever an opponent taps an artifact for mana, you gain control of that artifact until the end of your next turn. This means, let's say they tap their Soul Ring for 2 mana to power out their commander. You will get that Soul Ring during your next turn. You will tap that Soul Ring to do whatever, and then Ragost will simply eat the Soul Ring. Something that I think sounds incredibly satisfying. Next, I want to talk about the last line of text. At the beginning of each end step, if you gained life this turn, untap Ragost. This is kind of meant, I think the idea here is that you try to machine gun down your opponents, gaining a life during each of their turns, and then simply using Ragost to eat a bunch of stuff and dealing 3 to everyone. Some of the easiest way, in my opinion, to activate this ability are for 1 Scrap Heap, a 3-mana artifact. Whenever an artifact or enchantment is put into your graveyard from play, you gain a life. You just eat one of your artifacts, you deal 3 to each opponent, and you gain 1 life, making sure Ragost untaps. Maybe a bit more pricey in terms of long-term value is Tablet of Aperture, a 1-mana artifact that reads whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 1, if you do, you gain 1 life. So unlike Scrap Heap, it comes down for cheaper, but you need to pay 1 extra mana whenever you sacrifice an artifact. One more thing that comes to my mind whenever I read an effect that untaps a creature is, it's very sweet to give a creature like that a different ability to tap for. A pretty simple example is something like Arcane Teachings. Arcane Teachings is a 3-mana aura, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has tapped. This deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Now, of course, this card isn't insane, it doesn't even go that well with Ragost, but I want you to keep in mind that it is possible to give creatures good effects. For example, with a card like Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Agatha's Soul Cauldron can give pretty much any activated ability to your Ragost, and there are some abilities that become quite busted if you get to activate them 4 times a turn cycle. Lastly, let's talk about 3 more cards from recent sets. Apothecary White is a 4-mana 3/4 Vigilance, and whenever you attack, you create a food token for each player being attacked. It also allows you to, for 1 and tapping her and tapping X, untap foods you control, creating X 1/1 white human creature tokens. Weapons Manufacturing, 2-mana enchantment. Whenever a non-token artifact you control enters, create a colorless artifact token named Munitions with, when this token leaves the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. This quite obviously synergizes well with Ragost. Ragost pings all of your opponents at the same time, but the munitions token makes it so you can deal 2 to a problematic creature, potentially killing it if you manage to sacrifice more munitions. Well, now Ragus was pretty out there with his artifacts being food and sacrificing them. Let's go back to more simple strategies with Ryu Storm's Edge, a 4-mana 3/3 human samurai with first strike. And whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, untap it if it's the first combat phase of the turn. There's an additional combat phase after this phase. Now, Ryu faces a very big issue, as in she cares about 2 creature types while she herself is not one of them. I really don't know why Wizards did that. In my opinion, it's just an oversight. Samurai and warriors are, well, not mutually exclusive, but there is an important distinction here. Before we delve into that topic though, let's talk about the mechanic that was designed for attacking alone, and that is of course Exalted. A classic example is a card like Battlegrace Angel. 5 mana for 4, flying Exalted. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains lifelink until end of turn. Sublime Archangel is a flying Exalted 4/4, and other creatures you control have Exalted. This makes sure that even though you play a bunch of creatures, they don't go to waste. They actually buff that one samurai or warrior that is attacking alone. Merchant of Truth does something similar. 4 mana Angel, flying. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. Clues you control have Exalted. If you want to go into an aura direction, you can play Rashel, Fist of Torm, a 4 mana 2/4, double strike, auras you control have Exalted. Very notably though, this guy is also a human knight, but not a warrior or samurai. So let's talk about this dichotomy of creature types. Samurai, of course, is the much less prevalent creature type here, and most of the good samurai come from the set that Ryu is from in Kamigawa Neon Dynasties. We have Selfless Samurai, a 2 mana 2/2 that gives samurai or warriors that are attacking alone lifelink, and you can sacrifice it to give target creature you control indestructible. There's Aki Ronin, also a 2-drop. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Iron Soul Enforcer is also a samurai, although it does not have this attacking alone line of text. Instead, whenever it or a commander you control attacks alone, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Pretty powerful if you ask me. Unfortunately, although they did try to bridge the gap between warriors and samurai, they only did so in Kamigawa Neon Dynasties. Of course, they couldn't foresee that warriors would at some point be tied to samurai when they created most of the warrior creatures. Warriors are a lot better supported. There's cards that inherently are warriors and also support warriors, like Kargan Intimidator. Cowards can't block warriors, and for 1 you either give this creature +1/+1, turn something into a coward, or give a warrior trample. Similarly, Gornok the Red Reaper, a 3 mana 2/3 haste, also empowers warriors because cowards still can't block warriors, and whenever 1 or more warriors you control attack a player, target creature that player controls permanently becomes a coward. Attacking warriors you control get +X/+0, where X is the number of cowards you control. Bright Hearth Banneret is a 2 mana 1/1 warrior that makes warrior spells you play cost 1 less to play. And even though she's not a warrior herself, Lovisa Cold Ice provides quite a powerful buff to warriors. This 5 mana 3/3 human gives each creature that's a warrior, barbarian or berserker +2/+2 and haste. One last notable warrior is Arashin Foremost, a 3 mana 2/2 double strike, and when it enters or attacks another target warrior, gets double strike until end of turn. Now you can see that the samurai care about the warriors, but the warriors don't care about the samurai. There isn't an easy good fix to this problem. I personally would recommend just not playing samurai unless they are really good, like Selfless Samurai, and instead focusing a lot on the warrior package. If you do want to kind of mend the relationship of the two, you could either play cards like Maskwood Nexus that turn your creatures into every creature type, or good old Sensei Golden Tail, a 2 mana 2/1 that for 2 and tapping can put a training counter on a creature and thus turn the creature into a samurai in addition to its other creature types. Rayav the Mastersmith is a 2 mana 2/2. Whenever a creature you control that's enchanted or equipped attacks, that creature gains double strike until end of turn. We've talked about this a bunch. Equipment are kind of done to death in Boros, I know, and this follows your very stereotypical formula of a payoff for equipment in the command zone. This means that Rayath itself can be paired with pretty much just enchantment and it works just fine. I want to reiterate here that cards with for Mirrodin or Living Weapon like Dragonwing Glider or Nettlecyst are quite nice. They are both equipment and also creatures, but I want to harp down here is, again, there is a subtle difference to all the other equipment commanders here. Whenever you see Double Strike, you need to think of cards that trigger on dealing damage, either to players or even to creatures. Lost Jitte gains a charge counter whenever combat damage is dealt by a equipped creature, and you can remove a charge counter from it to untap a land, make target creature unable to block, or put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. Of course, it is an homage to Umezawa's Jitte, a 2-mana artifact that whenever the creature deals combat damage, you put 2 counters on this Jitte, and you can remove a counter from the Jitte to either give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn, or give any creature -1/-1 until end of turn, or gain 2 life. Before we move on to other double hit payoffs, I want to reiterate that Umezawa's Jitte, even in Commander, is one hell of a threat. What works specifically nicely here is first strike damage happens and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Jitte. And then before you move on to normal damage, you can buff the creature by 4. That means if a Rayath gets in for 2 with a Jitte on it, the Jitte gets 2 counters, and the second hit that Rayath gets in will be for 6 damage if you so choose, having dealt 8 commander damage even though Rayath had base power 2. You can quite easily see how this is very powerful, but even the -1/-1 on Jitte messes up so many decks. It's honestly disgusting, so let's move on to some different payoffs for dealing damage twice. Even though we are an equipment deck, I would not categorically exclude auras. Destructive Urge is a 3-mana aura that reads whenever enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices a land. It would suck to get hit by a double strike creature, wouldn't it? Maybe a bit more in the spirit of Commander, Celestial Mantle is a 6-mana aura that gives a creature +3/+3, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you double your life total. Doubling your life total? That's gonna get out of hand quite quickly. And of course, these cards are busted in any way, shape, or form you play them, but the Ancient Dragons also do have a deal combat damage trigger. In the case of Ancient Copper Dragon, you just create a D20 of treasure tokens, or if you have Rayath and give a double strike, you roll 2 D20. Let's move back to some degeneracy in Sami Wildcat Captain, because attacking with double strike isn't unfair enough. Sami Wildcat Captain is a 6-mana 4/4 double strike vigilance, but spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. Oh boy. I mean, affinity for artifacts just is never ever fair. I think the way you build this deck is quite obvious. You are playing a bunch of Ichor Wellsprings, you're playing a bunch of artifact lands, and then once Sami hits the battlefield, I think the game should just end. Giving every spell you control affinity for artifacts means you should really aim to play mostly colorless payoffs. Karn Liberated, a planeswalker that starts with 6 loyalty, exiles cards from opponent's hands, exiles permanents or restarts the game, but you get a bunch of stuff. Kozilek, Butcher Truth, 10 mana 12/12. When you cast it, you draw 4 cards. It has Annihilator 4, and if it were put in a graveyard, instead you shuffle your graveyard into a library. Darksteel Forge, artifacts you control are indestructible. And one suggestion by a viewer during a live stream, Sandstone Oracle is quite nice. It's a 7 mana 4/4 Flying Sphinx, and when it enters, you choose an opponent. If that player has more cards in hand than you draw cards equal to the difference. You could unload your hand because all of your things cost 0 mana because all of them have affinity for artifacts, and then you simply refill by playing a Sandstone Oracle. Since your deck will mostly consist of colorless cards and artifacts, you should probably be playing Mystic Forge for mana. Look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library, potentially for 0 because they have affinity for artifacts. If you don't like the top card of your library, by tapping the Mystic Forge and paying 1, you can exile the top card of your library. What I will point out though is you don't need to play just colorless cards. Getting a cost reduction of 7 on, let's say, an Apex of Power, 10 mana, 7 of them generic. Exile the top 7 cards of your library. Until end of turn you may cast spells from among them, and if the spell was cast from your hand you add 10 mana. Yeah, getting a affinity cost reduction on this is quite powerful. Similarly, the Myojins are cards that are inherently powerful to cast from hand, but also quite difficult to cast from hand. Again, a cost of 10 mana, 7 of them generic. It comes down with a divinity counter on it if you played it from your hand. It is indestructible as long as it has a divinity counter on it, and you can remove a divinity counter from this guy to destroy all lands. Now that will make it super difficult for all of your opponents to cast their spells. Your spells will probably still cost 0. Lastly, Soul Scour, 7 generic, 3 white, destroy all non-artifact permanents. Now this does mean your Semi dies, but it will have done its job, believe me. The next one was the commander that broke my brain so many times and was the commander that I had the most fun deck building myself, but also discussing on my stream. If you don't know, yeah, I stream the research process for these videos nowadays, mostly on Mondays and Tuesdays, so you can tune in if you want. It's Tywakeen, the perfect shot. A red and white human mercenary 2/3. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to a player equal to that creature's toughness, you draw a card. For X and tapping Tywakeen, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus X damage instead. The fantasy that is being invoked here is, of course, Tywakeen is the sniper, and a sniper always deals perfect damage, and then you get rewarded for dealing perfect damage. And let me tell you, this commander is so flexible to build that it might be the most open one on this list. At least that's what I would claim. Let's start with the first line of text. Whenever a creature is dealt perfect non-combat damage, you draw a card. The easiest creatures to kill perfectly are 1/1s. How do we ensure there's a couple of 1/1s in play? Well, we play cards like Forbidden Orchard, a land that taps for mana of any color, and whenever you tap it, an opponent creates a 1/1 colorless spirit. Now, usually it would suck to give an opponent a creature, but if that creature turns into just a card draw for you, things are looking quite different then, huh? Benevolent Offering. 4 mana, you choose an opponent, you and that player each create 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, and then you choose an opponent, could be the same, could be another, and you gain 2 life for each creature you control, and that player gains 2 life for each creature they control. Alliance of Arms. 1 mana, joint forces. Starting with you, each player may pay any amount of mana. Then each player puts X 1/1 white soldier creature token into the battlefield, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. Potentially, no one else besides you is gonna pay into an Alliance of Arms because they know what you're gonna do, but at that point, resistance is futile. You're handing out all of these 1/1s to opponents, but this is the first time Wakeen surprised me. You would expect a sniper to only kill opponent's creatures, but she really doesn't care. Even if your own creatures are dealt perfect non-combat damage, you get to draw a card. Well, we are handing out all of these 1/1s. So you've created a bunch of 1/1s for yourself and for your opponents. That's nice, but how do we get rid of them? Well, actually, it's pretty easy, barely an inconvenience. A card like Tremor for 1 mana will deal perfect damage to every 1 toughness creature on the battlefield, potentially drawing you upwards of 10 cards if you've handed out a bunch of tokens. And there is a bunch of 1 or 2 mana red cards that deal 1 to mostly all of your opponent's creatures, but sometimes to all creatures or all attacking creatures. So I think that is the easiest way to make good use of Tywakeen's first ability, creating tokens and killing those tokens. But let's not forget that you can just play 1 toughness creatures. A card like Unlucky Witness, a 1 mana 1/1, when it dies you exile the top 2 cards of your library until your next end step you may play one of these cards, is perfect for a Tywakeen deck, because it will die to one of those tremors and provide even more card advantage. Mog War Marshal is a 1/1 that comes with another 1/1 when it enters and another 1/1 when it dies. Another perfect source of card advantage for you. One specific card type or like token type that I wanted to talk about is Devils. For example, Devils created by Tybalt Rakish Instigator, a 3 mana 5/5. Your opponents can't gain life. -2, create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. Now this means that should even just one devil die to, let's say, a block, it can ping another devil, perfectly killing the devil token, which could then ping another 1 toughness creature, perfectly killing it and drawing you a card, and so on and so forth. Red, over the course of its life cycle, has also seen a couple of cards that can deal flexible damage. Most prominently from recent years, Fury, a 5-mana 3/3 pitch elemental that you can evoke by exiling a red card from your hand. When this creature enters, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. You could kill 4 1/1s, you could kill 2 2/2s, or a mix of anything in between. A card that was seemingly created for Tywakeen is Smoke Spirit's Aid, a 1 and X sorcery that reads, for each of up to X target creatures, create a red aura enchantment token named Smoke Blessing attached to that creature. Those creatures have enchant creature, and when enchanted creature dies, it deals 1 damage to its controller, and you create a treasure token. What's very nice here is you get a bunch of mana, you set this up once, and then for the following turn you'll have a bunch of mana. What do you do with a bunch of mana? Well, let's talk about the second paragraph of text here. For X mana and tapping Tywakeen, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a player or permanent this turn, it deals that much damage plus X instead. So the first way I thought about this, let's say you play a Prodigal Pyromancer, a 3-mana 1/1 that taps to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. It's in the deck to kill all of those 1/1s and draw cards. At a certain point, maybe you've pulled off a Smoke Spirit's Aid, and you have a double damage effect in play. Red has a couple of those. You tap your Prodigal Pyromancer to ping a player, and then you pay 10 mana, tap Tywakeen, make the Prodigal Sorcerer deal 11, and then double it, and that's a million damage. But what a person in my chat made me aware of is that this is completely and utterly broken with effects that trigger multiple times a turn. For example, a War Leader's Call, a 3-mana enchantment that gives creatures you control +1/+1. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. Well, you could be tapping Tywakeen and spend those 10 mana to make War Leader's Call deal 11 whenever a creature enters. That seems much more powerful. You could do the same with a Gutter Snipe, 3-mana 2/2, when you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. If you make that 12 damage, or even just, let's keep it low and mellow, if you make that 5 damage, that's already insane. And let's not forget, you're playing a bunch of cards like Blazing Volley, Alliance of Arms, Tremors. Those are instants and sorceries that can trigger your Gutter Snipe. And you're gonna be drawing a million cards. So if you have, let's say, Desperate Rituals in your deck, all of this fast mana, it's very easy how Tywakeen can turn from this controlling, creature-killing deck into a one-shot machine. I wanted to give a shout out to the Jolly Balloon Man. It just reiterates on a couple of things that we've seen so far. It's a 3-mana 1/4 haste. For 1 and tapping it, you create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon creature in addition to its other types and colors, and it has flying and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. Here, we've talked about them a bunch. The payoffs you should play here are good ETBs and good attack triggers, because the creature gets haste. Sun Titan, Ancient Gold Dragon come to mind. You're creating high value tokens. Yes, even if Sun Titan is just a 1/1, it still has a good effect. So you want to play Populate as a mechanic, with the Reflections comes to mind. Yes, you sacrifice the creatures, so Sundial of the Infinite is definitely worth a consideration. The next one is also quick to talk about. It's Velomachus Lorehold, a 7-mana 5/5 Elder Dragon. It has flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever it attacks, you look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to Velomachus' power from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Velomachus, quite conveniently, is powered at 5, and immediately when I saw this, I thought of one card, and that is Narset Enlightened Master. She's a Jeskai commander, 6 mana, 1st strike hexproof. When it attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. And what you did with that commander and what you will do with Velomachus is probably exactly the same. Because you see, there's one effect that just breaks this commander, and it is very conveniently priced at 4 and 5 mana, and that is extra combat steps. Let's imagine a world where you slam Velomachus, it comes down, it has haste, you attack, and in the top 7 cards of your library, you reveal a Relentless Assault. 4 mana, untap all creatures that attack this turn. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. So you get to attack with Velomachus again. You attack and you hit a Savage Beating. 5 mana, you can only play it during combat. Choose 1, creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn, or untap all creatures you control. And after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. Sweet, you get to attack again. You attack again, you hit a Mizzix Mastery. 4 mana, exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and you may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. Of course, you copy a Relentless Assault. That is now the 4th time you got to attack with Velomachus. And then maybe you attack, you hit an Invoke Calamity. 5 mana, you may cast up to 2 instant and sorcery spells with total mana value 6 or less from your graveyard, and play them without paying their mana cost. The spells would be put into your graveyard, exile them instead. I think Velomachus is super straightforward. You could also work to both improve his power and then play higher power instants and sorceries, but I think you're best advised to just stick to the most Boros thing ever and attacking people to death over and over again. Last in line is a weird one. It's Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp. Zabaz is a 1 mana commander, so it already gets a bonus in my books. This insect is a 0/0, but it has modulo 1. That means it comes into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it's put into a graveyard, you may put the +1/+1 counters on this creature onto target artifact creature. Could be yours, could be even an opponent one's. If a modular triggered ability would put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, put that many +1/+1 counters plus 1 additional counter on that creature instead. For a red mana, you can destroy target artifact you control. For a white mana, Zabaz gains flying until end of turn. This one, I have no solution for you. I can tell you that yes, you can look at all the modular cards, and some of them are pretty playable. Arcbound Worker is nothing to write home about, it's a 1 mana 1/1 modular. But of course Arcbound Ravager, a 2 mana 0/0 with modular 1, is quite the powerhouse because you can sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. And I can tell you that if your commander allows you to kill artifacts, you're probably playing cards like Ichor Wellspring and Mycosynth Wellspring. Cards that do something when they enter and cards that do something when they leave the battlefield. You can play payoffs for +1/+1 counters like Hangerback Walker, a 0/0 for XX. It enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, and when it dies, you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token for each +1/+1 counter on this creature. It can also improve itself by a 1 and tapping it, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Unfortunately, Zabaz, from what I've seen so far, was played in Modern exclusively in Hardened Scales shells. Hardened Scales being a green enchantment that just makes it so whenever +1/+1 counters are placed on something, you put 1 more on it, and green has a lot of these effects. Unfortunately, this is Commander, and Zabaz is a white-red color identity commander. So all of those Hardened Scales shenanigans go out of the window. I don't know if Zabaz is just the Hardened Scales decks for hipsters who want to do it without green, but I'm pretty sure it's a cool flavor win to play all of these modular cards. If you like Mirrodin, this might be a really cool deck for you because obviously modular stems from Mirrodin and you get to see all of those cool, sick artworks again. But I don't have much more for you for this commander. And that does it. I'm trying not to fall too far behind the research streams we do Monday and Tuesday with these videos, but being sick for 2 weeks straight really threw a spanner in the works for me. A stream to me is something temporary, and for these YouTube videos I wanted to be as healthy as possible because they'll be in the ether for a long time. In the end, I couldn't wait forever, and I think you hear some of that in my voice. If you like what we are doing here and enjoy conversing about cool and interesting commanders and magic in general, make sure to join the Discord. I hope to turn it into a positive and safe space for people to discuss the best hobby in this world. Anyways, always remember, be kind to yourself and others. Goodbye.